I'm Adam Hawes, creator of Realms of Antiquity, which just released on GOG a week or so ago and made some pretty good sales. Sadly, I've discovered that there are many people that will only buy your game when it's on sale. So,
Indeed. Well, I'm Mark Lemmert, developer of the Apple II Sword and Sorcery RPG, Nox Arceus. And I'm familiar with that, what Adam is talking about. Steam and GOG, it's all driven by sales, or mostly. Maybe the first month, maybe two, you get a bump, and then it's basically when you run the sales. And so Nox Arceus is available on those platforms as well, running through emulators. And yeah. That's me. Who's next?
I can go. My name's Stefan Katakini. I'm the founder of 81 Monkeys. We're a small indie game studio based in Vancouver, Canada. And our game is World of Antera. So we've been working on it for close to half a decade. And we're closing in on our backer demo. So pretty exciting time, but very busy here.
I'm Adam Burr. I'm working on Chronicles of Eleusis, The Dark Unknown. I'm not going to talk about how long I've been working on it, but I am hopefully very close to approaching beta test.
excellent.
And that leaves me. I'm Chris Freeman from the Lost Sectors. Me and Matt used to do it as a YouTube channel. Right now, just sort of me trying to keep the lights on and working on my own games, including Invaders from Planet X, which should come out in a few months here.
All right. So, welcome, Chris. Always good to have a guest on. Sorry, what was that?
No, I was just saying welcome to.
Okay. Yeah, I'm totally a professional. So, so we have a couple questions.
Professional's overrated.
So what we do is we have a few questions, and what I do is I'll roll a die. I have these lovely liquid dice. They have glitter inside and liquid suspension. What they're coming up with dice these days, man, would have blown our heads off in the 80s.
And you're paying the cat tax right there.
Oh yeah, no, she's knocking them off and so what I'll do is I'll just roll a d10 and I'll determine who gets the answer first. It's a 7, so that's gonna round down to 3. So hey, it's Chris.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh, as our first question, it's as a game developer, has your perspective changed about playing games? Do you notice things you didn't before?
That's an interesting question for me because I feel like the reason I started developing games is I played them different. So for me, I think it's almost the opposite. I used to think of games as like a chess match between me and the developer, only the developer has to declare all their moves before the game's played. And I would challenge them and try and beat them. That's how I looked at it as a kid. I've mellowed out a little bit and not taken it quite so seriously anymore. And I have allowed myself to have fun sometimes and actually just play them as a game. But yeah, I think I got into it because I saw them differently.
Nice. And by the way, you pick who goes next.
Oh, I get to pick who goes next.
Yeah.
Let's pick Adam.
There's two.
Oh, fun.
Took it out though. I mean,
yeah, let's not you, Adam. Other Adam.
Just want to. Chris's answer actually reminded me a little bit of the way that people have changed approaching like Dungeons and Dragons, where in like the Gygax days, there was an extent to which the culture was very much, it was the players versus the DM. And then as more people got into it who weren't, coming from war games or whatever, you realized that no, the players and the DMs are collaboratively doing this thing. And that kind of, I got the similar vibe there.
Yeah.
For me, I'm going to say yes, even though I basically started trying to make games within, you know, a couple of months of getting a Commodore 64 when I was 7. So it's not like there was a period where I wasn't at least like pretending. I mean, I never finished anything, but I had a Zork like that almost worked, but never quite worked. Um, the main thing since I started this actual game project that I've been working on is that I play many, many fewer games that I did before, because I keep wanting to steal that time to work on things, or half the time not be working on things but feel guilty about it and so not do anything fun either. When I do play or watch others play, I do spend a lot more time these days thinking about, do I feel like this is a good design decision that went into this game here? But I think the most interesting thing is the frequency with which I notice things that strike me as bad design in a game that is hugely popular or works anyway, which makes you realize, A, what you can get away with, but B, what's not actually bad design, but is just like preference or the preference of a genre or something. So yeah, that's my answer.
All right.
Let's pass down to Stefan.
Yeah, this is a good one. You guys might not know this, but I went to school for game design development, and you know, it was probably a huge waste of money when I could have just been making games in my basement. But that's beside the point. There was some value, and some of that value was actually being assigned the task of being critical about, about games. And I actually think that's really valuable in hindsight, because I don't necessarily sit down, play a game, pen and paper, and kind of like analyze it, but it's quite a fun thing to do. I mean, I think a lot of us have done it maybe with movies and in school and stuff like that, or books. But I find, like, as I started to make games and publish games in the game industry as a game designer, I started to really appreciate small details in games. When, like passing by a butterfly, and this might sound really silly, but like, it having some detail to it that captures my attention, or things like that, or even little details about UI and things like that, I tend to really appreciate. I think far more so because this is the work that I do on a daily basis. But then the flip side of that is I'm also more critical of polish and balancing, but it's funny because, like, I could be really critical of polish and balancing in one game, but in another, I don't care because I'm not playing the game for that purpose, right? It's like, I think like Adam said, it kind of is genre specific, like if it's a AAA game, I'm far more critical of some of the design decisions they made than if it's, like an indie game. But something that I find is really weird, this is something that I don't think the casual player would experience, is little small moments or little small like pangs of jealousy when I play a game and I'm like, damn, that's really good. Or, like, I don't think a player ever has that experience. Like, oh, I wish I could make that game. Like that thought going through their head. Maybe they do, I don't know, but or I wish I thought of that or something like that. I think that's pretty interesting. But I have a pretty, like, it's pretty, I don't want to say easy, but I think maybe it's just natural for me to, I have a tendency to enjoy things. I have a tendency to enjoy things that a lot of people tell me they don't enjoy. So whether it's a movie, I don't watch a movie and then come out of it like, oh, the ending sucked, the whole movie sucked. I come out of the movie like, oh, the ending sucked, but man, that acting was really good, and I love that story, that part of the story, or I love that scene, and I gravitate towards things that I like. I guess I seek out things to enjoy about any media that I'm engaging in. And video games are no different, but definitely I think the details or nuance I look for is probably a lot greater than because I have this connection to creating video games, and it's like an important part of who I am. I've talked to people, developers and designers who either applied at studios I worked at, or I just talked through networking, and they're like, oh, I don't have time to play video games, or I don't play video games. And I'm just like, why are you working in this industry? Like, why are you doing that work? I just don't understand, because like, I mean, like, everyone's different. I'm not trying to knock somebody who doesn't do that, but like, let's like think of a movie director that doesn't watch movies. It's pretty crazy, right? Like, so I think it's a healthy activity for people like us who care about video games to continue playing them or to revisit them. But this is the last thing I'll share, is that I have low patience for mechanics that I feel are wasting my time without bringing value. You know, and I think a lot of games do this, where they're like, oh, I don't know, they add mechanics sometimes, it feels like, to pad up the game, and it's so unnecessary. Like, I would way rather play a 10 or 15-minute game that gets to the point than a game that takes me 20 or 30 hours that has what seems like this like padding in it. But that, you know, it's a tricky one in some games. So yeah, this is something I could talk about for hours, but I find it really fascinating, and I play a lot of games. I'm currently finishing up my second run of Elden Ring. I don't know if any of you have played that game. It's really fun. I'm thinking of going back to Baldur's Gate 3 because I didn't finish it, and I think I definitely have to do that. So, and then I actually downloaded Nox Arceus because I never finished that. So yeah, I like to jump around, dabble in different genres, and I think very eclectic taste. And I think all of this and my tastes have culminated in as a result of my interest in making video games. Not necessarily just my interest in being a game player. So yeah, that's a big question for sure. Next, Mark, you're next.
All right. Well, I guess I'll just start by saying I agree with your philosophy, Stefan, about the value as a game developer of continuing to play games, which was not something I did during the making of the original Nox Arceus game, just because I was worried about distractions and wanted to really focus and make sure that I finished it because of some challenges I'd had it with distractions as a kid when trying to make games, and it worked out in the end. But this time around, while I was making the expansion Lord of Storms and while I'm making Nox Arceus 2, I've changed that. I feel like I've got confidence now that I can finish something because I did. I know what the whole process looks like, and it really just, so I've been able to kind of position it as like, okay, we all have a certain amount of downtime, and occasionally I will decide I'm going to use that downtime to play this particular game, that sort of thing. Right now, coincidentally, I'm playing Baldur's Gate 3, like you just mentioned, and I am in Act 3 towards the end of it. I'm probably within hours of, maybe a few tens of hours of finishing it. I'm going to go through to the end. I loved it, by the way. I mean, I think it's an awesome game. But anyway, getting a little bit more focused on the question, but I will circle back, I think, to Baldur's Gate 3 at some point. So I'm going to start with like, okay, here's how I played games before I had ever made one, to contrast that with how it changed. I started using Apple II computers when I was 5 years old, and the first RPG I played was Ultima 3. I was around 8-ish years old. Started learning programming on the Apple II around the same time. And so pretty much back to my earliest memory of playing RPGs, at least, my approach to playing them was, this is fun, and how can I make a game like this? I'm like thinking through programmatically, or trying to think through programmatically how I could make it. And of course, early on, the chasm between what I knew in programming and making something like Ultima was light years. But nonetheless, that's how my mind was working, and I would try. I would try an AppleSoft Basic and high res graphics, H plotting here to there, and we grab trying to make something that looked like an Ultima screen and wrangle with like, okay, but now how do I make it move? and what about that whole text that all these issues and these challenges which were just overwhelming at the time, but that's how I would play games, was from a standpoint of thinking about how I could make one. And I would bounce between genres at times, like, okay, there's no way I could make a game like Ultima, but what if it was more like Wizardry, or what if it was an arcade game? And I kind of go through the same process of like, well, how programmatically, how could I make this? And back in those early days, I didn't successfully make anything. The gulf was very big between what I was doing programming wise and the games I was playing. But we all start somewhere, and so that's how I played games. And there wasn't a lot of thought at that point in my head towards the design of the games. It was really more raw tech, because that gulf was so big. How do I solve these technical challenges to be able to produce this? So it was that combined with just fundamentally having fun playing the games at the same time. Of course, it wasn't fun, we wouldn't be doing it, right? So fast forward to, okay, so I made Nox Archaeist, and how has that changed how I approach game playing? I would say that I absolutely, when I'm playing a game now, am thinking about the mechanics, but especially puzzle mechanics, but really anything, from a standpoint of, okay, is this something that's interesting, that's fun? Is there something inspired by this that I could implement in one of my own games? And I'll give both a modern game and a retro game example of how that evolved in both the original Nox Archaeist game and in the Lord of Storms expansion. Won't give anything away for Nox 2, Nox Archaeist 2, which I'm working on now. So when I was working on the Lord of Storms expansion, for inspiration during some of my just regular downtime, I was playing Magic Candle, a game that the only reason I was ever playing it is because Chris Freeman recommended it over and over and over. I don't think Lost Sectors ever did an episode on it, but gave great recommendations
on our short list.
On the short list, yeah. I'm like, that's good enough for me. I need to check this out. Great game. I can see why Chris recommended it. I didn't finish it, but I got maybe I don't know, probably half-ish way into it, good enough to get the flavor. And I was just, sometimes they just come out of nowhere, and they're the simplest things. Like there's a mechanic in Magic Candle that involves fountains, and I just scratched the surface of it and didn't play the game long enough to, I think, fully appreciate everything that was going on with the fountains. But when that happened, I suddenly remembered, oh yeah, fountains are cool. I remember this cool stuff with fountains and Ultima that I had forgotten. There was some, wonderful line in one of the Ultima 3 dungeons where we walked in, and there was some misty writing that said something like fountains fair, fountains foul, all are found in dungeons bowel. And I just loved that from a tone setting lore standpoint. And so fountains just, as a result, had this like cool place in my head that I'd forgotten about. Magic Candle reminded me of it with having fountains. And so then I started imagining a puzzle mechanic that I could do that involved fountains in Lord of Storms that in the end had nothing to do with how Magic Candle did fountains, or really nothing to do with how Ultima did them either. It was just but that's just how inspiration works, So I invariably have a notes list for any game that I'm working on, or even a future game that I'm not working on yet. And so when I'm playing games, it'll happen over and over where I'll end up adding stuff to that notes list that I think of while playing the game. Modern gaming example, and I really like the fact that this works out with both modern and retro games. Doesn't matter that a modern game is not implementable on a retro platform outright, the same sort of thing happens. And the example I'll give there is Skyrim. Skyrim was a huge source of inspiration for the original Nox Arceus game, which, even though this is a little bit weird because I hadn't actually finished a game yet at the point I was making the original Nox game, I had done enough attempts at it that I was really kind of in a game developer mindset when I was playing Skyrim. And what I got out of that was, I thought, okay, I love this skill based classless system. That's really cool. I don't remember that in Ultima 2 RPG. Is that something that could be implementable in 8-bit? And then as I was playing, it turned out it was, just not with as many skills, because that's how Nox Arceus works. And then when I was thinking through puzzle mechanics in the original Nox Arceus game, because I wanted to have a rich set of puzzle mechanics, and ones that had not been done before, or as far as I knew had not been done before in the original 80s games. And one that I thought of was, well, in Skyrim, there's all these puzzle locks where I'm going back a number of years from the last time I played Skyrim, but it's like there'll be some symbols next to the door that give you this clue, and then somewhere else in the general area, that dungeon, you'll find these pedestals that'll like have an eagle's head and a dragon's face, and you have to interact with the pedestals to turn, which is the, kind of like the monster shape that's showing, and get them all in the right order, and then that unlocks the door. And I thought, well, boy, that's complex, but what could I do in 8-bit that is at least a little bit reminiscent of that? And what I came up with was what I call the trigger lock door in Nox Arceus, where it gives you like this text readout saying you see a door with strange symbols, and it tells you the number of strange symbols that you see. Doesn't tell you anything else about the symbols, just it's 3 symbols, it's 4 symbols. Well, that and that corresponds with the number of triggers you need to hit. And in this case, you got to go find the triggers, so it's an exploration thing, kind of like in Skyrim, but of course it's an 8-bit map making exploration thing. But then when you find the triggers, it's there. In 8-bit, I couldn't do anything like, having like 3 different monster shapes appear on screen that you alternate. No, that's not going to happen in 8-bit. The trigger is simply you step on it and it activates times however many triggers it is. But that mechanic, which by the time I was done with it, I don't think anybody probably would have experienced it and thought, oh, that reminds me of Skyrim. But that's how the inspiration flows for me from one thing to another, even in a modern game, and translating something into 8-bit that is vaguely reminiscent of the idea, at least. Anyway, so that's how it has affected game playing for me. And I think Adam, or you?
Yep, that
Adam won.
Some really great points brought up. By the way, the magic candle was the inspiration for the spellbook system in Realms of Antiquity as well, because I like the idea of spells just being like equipping a sword. You're just equipping a spellbook. So,
Nice.
but I like that approach, because then you don't have to track. I didn't have to like have each character learn spells and develop like their own. It was a uncertain stacking design, which on 8-bit systems you really have to watch the memory. You don't have infinite memory to push around. And it's also a really good point that as any kind of content creation, you want to participate. You have to consume it as well as produce it. Like authors, like Stephen King himself has said, "Hey, I read all the time." That's I don't just write; I read too. And I think the same thing can be said for video game development. If you're not playing video games, or if you have no time for it, you're never going to really learn how to make them well. So, and yeah, Baldur's Gate 3, I'm still in Act 1. I haven't actually played it in a couple months because I actually need to upgrade my PC. It's lagging terribly though when it runs. But I did notice that the level of polish and design, I'm noticing it all over in it, and it's so good. Like, they did such a great job. In particular, it's where I'm at, my characters are just shy of level 5, which, if anyone knows classic D&D, level 5 is where things get very interesting, because wizards get fireball and lightning bolt, which completely changed combat from being a, oh, we're all gonna die, to, roasting an entire room of goblins with a fireball, like killing them all in one hit. So I really want to reach level 5, but I definitely notice as I go along, there are no random encounters in this game. It is all fixed, which means they are deliberately making sure I don't get to that level of power before the end of Act 1. Like, essentially, you have to complete all of the
Right.
major stuff to hit that level.
Yeah. Yeah, that I found that very interesting because I'm used to being able to grind in a game, and that is not an option in there. At the same time, I feel like somehow they balanced this on the head of a pin because it works.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I've done like a lot of side quest stuff, sometimes I haven't, and that hasn't, neither of those two ways of approaching it have seemed to result in I end up in a situation where I'm absurdly over or underpowered. I really applaud them for how well they balanced it using that technique.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic piece of work, and that's the kind of thing that after you've done development, you start noticing the little details like that. Like, hey, I see what they did there. That's cool, And then you also see the flaws too. I mean, I went back to play Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo once, and I noticed that the displays in combat were not updating in real time. Like, I got hit, but then it wasn't until it like moved a pointer and you visibly see the numbers change. It's like, oh, they didn't do their refresh until after this point. And as you know, on 8-bit machines, boy, we know all about having to refresh the screen, right, Mark? Remember to do that expeditiously, because it won't change unless you actually manually update all those little numbers. So yeah, it's been it definitely changes your perspective, and it also makes you both appreciate the good design better, and definitely you start like noticing things and going like, oh, that's cool, I want to do that. Can I do that in mine? I didn't have too much to say on that one, but so I will see here who gets the next question. And actually, it looks like it's me. So the question is, many CRPGs employ level scaling, by which the game's difficulty in terms of opponent power and challenge matches the player's level of power. Are you a proponent or opponent of it? So, this is a good question, because I think the first game I became aware of that did this was Final Fantasy VIII back in the day. Because I didn't actually play it, my brother did, but he told me, oh yeah, no, monsters just scale up to your strength. They're always the same difficulty. And funny enough, my brother, who's a massive tabletop fan, he's been playing in a 5th edition D&D game, and he complained to me that the problem he feels with that particular version of D&D is that they basically flattened out a lot of things. If you're bad at a saving throw, you're always bad, no matter how high level you get. And even though, and anyone who says that, oh, it's all their superhero power, the grognards always complain that the new edition is too easy. They clearly haven't played. It is lethal. And almost my brother's a magic user, spells are useless because monsters almost always make their saving throws to resist them. So it just like, but the main thing was, he says it's frustrating because it doesn't feel like I'm getting any stronger, and that I think is the problem with level scaling. It's great for the developer. They don't have to, basically, let's make things always challenging all the time. But I think what they're missing is that they're missing the visceral satisfaction in leveling up and seeing your character get visibly stronger, more powerful. And on an encounter that they barely survived, now they're suddenly being able to keep up, or even better, just wipe the floor with that opponent. And that bit of satisfaction I think is crucial to any role-playing game, computer or otherwise. So I am not in favor of level scaling myself. That said, it done right, it works. Play a lot of Fallout 76, and there is definitely level scaling there, but they cap it so that at one point in like the lowest level area of the game, the enemies stop advancing at 50. So after a while, you know you can go to that area, and the monsters there are all a lot less powerful. And I think its maximum is 100, which I've seen guys running around at that are level like 3,000. So, but the trick is they never really actually they cap out, and so they never really get any stronger. So, and of course that's an online game. You're it's a different kind of cadence. You're not playing for an end game anyway. So, and I think that would be another difference is an online game. They want you to keep playing, but a normal single player game, you do have an end, beginning, middle, and end. So you got to pace it. I do know, like with Realms of Antiquity, my end game area, I had to like give all of the final bad guys lots of hit points because otherwise they would just get wiped out. I did hear that's like I have heard complaints from guys that the end game drags, man. It's just a resource war trying to fight through all the monsters before you run out of rations. So I would probably try to do things a little differently in an end game in the future as a result. So let me see. I'll pick someone to go next. Let's go with Stefan.
I was muted. Yeah, this is really another really great question. I'm not a fan either, really, but I think I agree with you, Adam, that it can be utilized in ways that benefit the game experience. But it's like progression-based scaling of difficulty and rewards. Like what Skyrim does. Skyrim doesn't just scale difficulty. The rewards you find in containers and stuff like that scale with the game as well. It's like I understand why game designers choose to do that. It's definitely the path of least resistance. That's the nice Stefan response. The more critical Stefan response is that it's lazy design to sort of just wash your game that way. And because so I knew this RPG developer. He was actually a designer, and he showed me his launching spreadsheet. It was very robust. He was super proud of it, and he should have been. It was really impressive. It had every enemy in the game, all of their stats. It had all the player progression in there. And he had charts that would show the difficulty of the game in conjunction with the player. And it was essentially this perfect linear line through the whole game. So he was not using procedural scaling. But he was designing it like it was. What he was doing was he was ensuring that every encounter throughout the game was equally challenging through the whole game. And it was like a turn-based, sort of like a JRPG style RPG. So he knew the average damage enemies would do and the average damage the player would do, and he would just keep that scaling through the whole game. And this is one of two major things that I don't like about procedural scaling. So like he did intentionally, but I don't like that difficulty doesn't vary like this. I don't want every battle to feel equally challenging. That's just not interesting. I think, Adam, you said, or in the previous question, you said how hitting level 5 changes combat in that moment. You all of a sudden get access to these spells, and now you feel uber powerful. And that's really rewarding. And I think difficulty in games should go like this, and then like this, and then like this, and then like that. And it should be this roller coaster ride where at times you feel dominant and powerful, and at other times you feel really challenged and needing to be strategic. And procedural difficulty can do that, but I think that's something that's often missed. And so Skyrim kind of felt like that. It was a little bland in terms of like the difficulty ramping in that game. But the other side of it that I don't like is reward ramping. Like in Skyrim, you open a chest and you just know it's like, this is just going to be nothing exciting, whereas in some older RPGs, like finding a glass sword in Ultima was like, yes, like, that was like, that's a super powerful weapon. And I can use that at one moment in this game. I can go to that dragon in the cave that had all the loot. I can use this glass sword to slay it and steal all that loot and I can use that to my advantage. That's really exciting. But in Skyrim, you never got that. Like, you never felt like this item was placed here by the designer for me to find. And that's a real missing, in my opinion. So I don't like that. In Elden Ring, which I mentioned I was playing earlier earlier today, but we in that game, it's there may be some procedural difficulty. I know there's difficulty ramping because you can pull people into your world, they'll help you out, and when you do, all the monsters scale. So like the monster that you one hit to kill, now that you have somebody on your party, now takes like 2 or 3 hits to kill. I get that, I understand that, but I think the world is built in a way that like you're constantly finding places, you're bumping up against places that are really difficult, and then you're like, I'm not going to go there now, I'll go over here, it's way easier, and then you'll so you have some control over the difficulty. I could go to that tough area because I know probably some great rewards there, and if I want to go through the difficulty of fighting through that area, I might reap the benefits, like I'll level up faster, things like that. And like, to me, that's really great game design. And I think Elden Ring's a really good example of where procedural scaling and handcrafted scaling that relates to the world works really well. What else did I want to say? I wrote a couple notes down here just while you were talking, but I think it's definitely a challenge with open world games. That's where it really becomes difficult, because like, how do you control the player's movement around the world, and how do you design a game that lets them kind of go anywhere they want and continues to be interesting? And this is something that with World of Antera, I've constantly butted up against and had to design some interesting systems to sort of accommodate that. I'll give you guys a couple examples. So there's currently no planned procedural scaling in the game. It's fully open world. So like an Ultima game, you get plopped in the world and you can really go anywhere you want. We do have some story arcs that are region specific. So you can sort of go to this region and kind of finish the story arc there before going to another region, but you can do those in any order you want. It's just the main story that sort of you have to follow certain beats. But how do you let somebody like play in one region and then go to another region and then feel newly challenged in that new region when they leveled up a bunch completing that first region? And that's just the path they chose. So what we did, one of the things we did, we've done a number of things, but one of them is to actually have progression tied to a bestiary. So like if wolves are a general creature you kind of find throughout the world, wolves are tough when you first meet them. And as you beat them, you start to learn how to fight against them better. So the bestiary actually has progression tied to wolves, that the more encounters you have, the easier wolves become for you. And then regions have mobs that are region specific. There's like 5 or 6 per region. And so you would not have encountered those in the previous region, even though you leveled up. So the next region may be slightly easier because you got better gear and you've leveled up more, but you haven't experienced these mobs yet. And so they're going to be more difficult at first. And then as you fight them a few times or a dozen times, they start to become easy again. And then you start to get some power and agency over that region and feel that moment of like, I'm kicking ass now. So it's difficult though. It's definitely a hard route to go from a balancing design perspective, but it's really important. It was really important for me from day one that we did this. And the other thing too, this is a really funny example actually. So we have tons of containers in our game. And if you guys know World of Antera, the containers function similar to Ultima 7's containers. We can drag things around in them. Our model is kind of a hybrid where you can drag things around the containers, but then you have a highly accessible UI for managing your inventory, and you can drag things back and forth and whatnot. But so we have these containers in the game, and we've had some problems with items with updating items and their sort of their pivot points and things like that, where the item, when you open a container, now it's like outside the container from where it was hand placed. And the programmer added a button in the game, and the button was to, like, if you open a container and you see items outside, you can click this button in Unity and all the items will pop back in the container. It's just he's like, oh, it's an easy way to fix the container. He had previously added a button that shook the items. So if you had a bunch of items in there, you can just click shake and they would just like randomize their positions essentially. But the funny thing is I'm like, we're never going to use these buttons. And they're like, why would we never use them? I'm like, because I want everything in the containers to be hand placed by us. I want to hand place everything. And I happen to be, we're preparing a demo of the game we're sending to a couple publishers, which we haven't signed with any publishers. But I think maybe it's time for us to really consider that path. But anyway, so I'm going through this one settlement, and I was opening the containers and I'm like, man, these weren't hand placed. So I'm going through every container and hand placing them. And because like sometimes you want, like, there's a silver necklace in Lark's dresser, but I want her shirt to be over it so that you can't see it. So you got to drag the shirt off and be like, oh, there's a silver necklace. And if you want to steal it, you can snag it. Or maybe I want to put a couple coins in there and again, have them like under something. So it's, I want players when they open a container or get a reward to feel like it was hand placed by the designer, for them to discover. That sense of discovery is so critical. And I think it's one of the, like, Skyrim is amazing. I've put over 200 hours into Skyrim. The funny story is I've never finished it, but that's because I replayed it so many times, but I love the world and the game so much. And I think there's some mental block about finishing the game that, like, if I finish it, I'm done. I won't come back to it. But if I don't, then there's still something in the world to discover. I don't know. But I've never finished it after like 200 something hours. But it always felt like a real missing. So yeah.
Yeah, you made me remember something. Actually, there is another type of level, and it was done in the Ultimate series. Although, well, not many people recognize it. I always wondered why, when you saved your game, it told you you've made this many moves. It's because what they do is, when you go past certain thresholds, it increases the range of the monster randomness.
That
The stronger monsters spawn.
I have notes about that in my notes for this.
Yeah, and I was going to say a perfect example of the level scaling versus not level scaling. World of Warcraft. If you played Classic, it was, if you went to the bad high level region too soon, you got your butt kicked. Don't leave Goldshire until you're level 10, man, or 12. Do all the quests.
Get killed by Hogger.
Yep, exactly. Whereas now, I must admit, it's been a few years since I played, but when I last played, they were still went up to the level 120, and then they squashed that back down to 60, and now I don't even know what it's like to play the game anymore, because it just has capped scaling in all of the original zones. And I don't know, it just seems less fun. I remember doing the quests in the last expansion where you could get the 120, and all the monsters just scaled to you. It was your items that determined how strong you got, and I don't know, it just wasn't as satisfying.
That makes sense. I think in an MMO, the difficulty is the draw to progress, or one of the main like draws to progress. So if difficulty starts to drop, that why am I doing these quests and stuff like that becomes it's less motivating, I guess, in a way. So that's an interesting example. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. And go ahead and pick who goes next.
Oh, right. Chris, you want to go?
Sure, I'll go. Settle in, folks. I kind of want to tie this sort of back in with Stefan's answer from before, too. One of the problems with level scaling is it works if you don't notice it. The moment you notice it, the moment you see the rails, it stops working as a user. You feel like you're wasting your time. All those dings you got no longer mean anything. And that's where it sort of falls apart for me on a design and gameplay standpoint. But I do want to, going back to like wasting, can I go backwards for a second to the other question, bring it in and come back to this for a second? Because
whatever.
wasting time was in wasting the player's time. If you go back and watch the Lost Sectors over and over again, anytime we're mad at a game, it's because it doesn't respect our time. It's having us do stuff for the sake of doing stuff, and it's not doing anything that we necessarily find fun or advance us. Or I don't know if you can hear the motorcycle outside, or he's driving away. Should be fine. And you end up just being like, why am I here? Why am I bothering? Who cares? I'm just making numbers on a screen go up. The moment you think that, the game's over for you. And I would stand by that, and with two really big exceptions. One is sort of Magic Candle. And the reason why Magic Candle is different on that is because there's a time limit on the game. Every one of those steps you take, that wasting your time is the game. How do you manage your time to finish the game? And you don't notice it the first playthrough, which I feel is kind of a trap. And it's one of the things I don't like about Magic Candle, because you don't really know how much this time wasting is biting you in the butt yet. But there's another game that just came out that has managing your time wasting down to a science, and it's Helldivers 2. When you want to call in support, when you want to call in your extraction, when you want to do something, you suddenly have to type in all these arrows. And if you get it wrong, it flashes at you and you got to start again. And you're doing that in the middle of a fight when things are shooting at you or trying to jump on you or trying to eat you. And wasting your time builds tension. So it's a tool that if you know how to use it, you can do really, really cool things with. But then this is part of why I'm thinking about Helldivers 2. They do a scaling thing, which is really interesting to me. They don't scale up and down. They scale sideways. You just get more tools to play the game the way you want to play. Maybe you unlock shotguns because that's the type of style you want to play with. So you unlock those and you fight with that. Or you unlock sniper rifles because that's the kind of gameplay you want to play with, and that's what you do. But none of them necessarily make you more or less powerful than the thing you had before. You just have a new way to play. Not a lot of games do that. Not a lot of games can.
I mean,
and
options are power.
options are
Yeah.
power.
That's
It-
I mean,
That's
go ahead.
that's a thing that a friend of mine gets into fights with people playing Pathfinder 2 all the time, because they're like, oh, some people like to give everybody a free archetype at the start of the game. And it's just like, it doesn't really make you more powerful. It just, there's more stuff that you can do. And it's like, that's
Still
a form
power.
of power. So I'm sorry.
No, that's exactly it though. It gives you this wonderful way of playing, and you end up trying things and you end up going into games and doing them differently than you might have tried just because you're like, oh, I've got this new toy. I want to try it out. You learn another way to play, you get your butt kicked. You're like, no, I'm going back to my sniper rifles. I had more fun with that.
I mean, yeah, that's one of the draws for me with Fallout 76 is after a while you can craft, you make like there's like a dozen different sets of power armor. There's tons of weapons. You can make new ones. You can do different paints. You can customize, and all of that just and then you're like, oh, I want to do the sniper rifle, or no, I want to make a badass or I'm going to do a mini nuke.
Mhm.
You can play the game any number of different ways, and yeah, lateral options definitely really nice.
It really, really is. And so it is a way to balance that most people don't think of. And I wish happened more for like the combat games. But when you're used to the sort of grinding up games, you want to hear the ding. You want to see yourself hit the wolf harder. You want to see that power fantasy come in. That's a lot of what the old school role playing games seem to really coddle towards. But then, actually, coddle's maybe not the right word, but you know what I mean. But if you look back at our oldest games, our Wizardries, our Bard's Tales, Deathlord's a good example because I love Deathlord. I don't care how high a level you were, the Medusa with stone kills you instantly. So there's a sort of weird level cap or power balance because you can be better, but you're not invincible. They have some sort of ceiling that no matter how good you get, you're still at risk. And I think that's what I see a lot of developers trying to fix is how do we make it fair and reward you for powering up, but also not let you become invincible and make the fun of the game go away because you don't ever have to think about anything if you just grind enough orcs. That South Park episode where we're going to go kill 65,000 pigs for 2 XP each so we can fight someone else. And just because that's the safe way to do it. I've told the story of I had a friend when I made my Neverwinter Nights dungeons of he just sat unlocking a chest because I made picking XP. Picking locks gave you XP. So he spent a half hour picking that chest because your users will optimize the fun out of the game.
Mm-hmm.
It's so to some extent, balancing is a fool's errand. The balance on day one, the day you release it, is not the balance on year one when the forums are full and everyone's given their advice and we all know how to do it now. Best example I have of that is back in college, I was on a mud, and at the bottom of the dungeon before you got to the Drowland was the Dracolich. And you had to take a party down there to fight that thing. It was such a beast until one guy soloed it. And once that happened, we all knew how. We all went down there and we could all do it because now we know what you got to do. And your game won't stay balanced. So tell a story like Stefan was saying with like, I don't randomly throw stuff around. I put stuff where I want it because I'm telling a story. I'm building the world with that. I'm creating a feel. And if the feel holds up, the balance doesn't matter. Now, having all said all that, I'm going to be a hypocrite and talk about my tabletop D&D game. Because with that, it's a different type of time risk, and it's a different type of wasting people's time. If my video game, if I die, I reload. I can go back to where I was. I can get my stuff back. At a tabletop where you're playing for keeps, or maybe you got Iron Man in something, I don't know if that's how you wanted to push it. On the tabletop, for one of my players to do something easy, they have to roll a 10. To do something mildly difficult, they have to roll a 15. And if it's hard, it's a 17. I don't care what their modifiers are. I don't care what anything else is. And they don't know it. I've been DMing for decades and no one's ever caught me on it. And I just pick whoever's in the middle of the party, and that's what they got to roll and sort of adjust for everyone else in the party. And an easy enemy will take 1 to 2 hits. A medium enemy will take 3 to 4, and a hard enemy will take 5 to 7. And I really don't even care what damage they're rolling. And they don't know.
I think I can see why you look at tabletop differently first, because you can kind of simulate, I would think, and I don't have a ton of tabletop experience, but because you're the DM in control, I would think you could kind of simulate that experience that Stefan talked with, kind of about with the peaks and the valleys. You can run that experience, which is where the fun comes from, so the the kind of like a level scaling is what you would want to call it in that kind of environment. I see that's actually beneficial and not actually creating the detrimental vanilla experience scenario.
Yeah. Right. It's not making anyone look at this and go, oh, anytime I've tried to adhere strictly to the books, it ends up being unfun in one way, shape, or form. But sticking with this is my power curve I want, and letting them have that power curve, that works fine.
You bring up a good point that with tabletop, I would say one of the other things is because you can't reload, players are a lot more cautious. My brother, we're playing in an old school Essentials game, which is classic, basic with some enhancements. Very well done, actually. But he had us, we come up to a room. In the room, there is hair hanging from the ceiling down to about knee level, just hanging off the ceiling. We can't see anything on the ceiling. We're like, we'll stick a torch in it. Oh, it smolders and burns a little. Nothing happens. We'll use a 10-foot pole to try to twist and pull on it. And it's like, well, you feel a little give, but you can't pull it off. And we're like, we're not going in there. But there's a case on the other side of the room. Like, nope, we're not going in there.
Pass. Yeah.
Push him in there if you try.
Sadly, we had no hirelings that we could throw in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Henchmen.
So, kind of bringing all this back, like one of the things I'm doing with the role playing game I'm making is I'm not going to try and balance. I'm going to let the players balance themselves. In settings, there will be sliders for how hard is it to level? Like how much XP do you get? Do you get 1 times, 2 times, 5 times? You know, how often do the enemies hit? Do they get a penalty? Do they get an advantage? You can tune in what you want. If you want a power fantasy, jack all your stuff all the way up. Go for it. Have fun. I'm just glad you're having fun with my game. I don't need necessarily to have, beaten you with a challenge or something like that. So if you're not having fun, fix it. Just change the numbers, and I will have a normal setting that this is the way I intend you to go through the game. And if you want to change it because that's fun for you, change it because that's fun for you.
Yeah, I just noticed Baldur's Gate 3 has karmic dice option. I don't know if you guys noticed that. It's with karmic dice, it doesn't perform like an actual die, which can be completely random.
Right.
It actually goes high, it goes high low waves. It's essentially kind of like our old random number generators that you do use exclusive or. They're always inverting. They always go high low. And the whole idea to that is that this makes it so that you don't have sustained numbers of low rolls and then a sustained number of high rolls all in succession. And it kind of makes it a little more actiony. But in truth, it benefits the monsters more because they make more attack rolls than the players ever. And so, and I've noticed that, man, these combats in Baldur's Gate 3 get tough. These monsters are always making their rolls. What the hell?
Yeah, the action economy is real, and you have to balance that in with just the raw numbers, is how many attacks are up there. XCOM and XCOM 2, the new one's not the original. I'm trying to remember which guy on the dev team was talking about it, but he's like, yeah, we had to change it so that if it said 87%, it was more like 92, because people just didn't believe us that it was fair. We had to kind of lie on the numbers a little bit so that people believed us, because they always see the bad thing happening. So, yeah, but I'm generally against it because I do like that feeling of power building up, but I'm also kind of on the fence for everything I just said too. So, so I'll kick it over to Mark next, I think.
Sure. Wow, so much great stuff said on this topic, and I definitely have some very strong feelings on it as well. And I will start with I want to start with a story. The most fun experience I've ever had playing an RPG involves something where this experience would not have been possible with level scaling. It just never would have happened. And this goes back to Ultima 3 and the early Ultimas, as you all may know or recall. I think it was Chris talking about before. They did do some level scaling. It was only on the overworld. Dungeons were not level scaled. And for me, that worked. I even though I'm generally against level scaling, I suppose I should have said that from the get-go. I could kind of live with it the way Ultima did it like that. And so what happened was in Ultima 3, I went for the market force way earlier than I arguably should have with characters that I had. But this was my first RPG. I was still learning how to win RPGs. So I was asking my brother, or actually two older brothers, for hints that had won the game. And I'm like, where's the market force? I would just never do that now with a game like that. I'd want to figure it out. But that's a whole other thing. So they tell me, oh, it's in that dungeon south of Dawn. Well, I knew where Dawn was, And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go get it. And I don't remember exactly where the power level of my party was at, but it definitely was nowhere near as powerful as you can get in Ultima. And so I go into the dungeon and get down to the 8th level. I didn't know exactly where it was, but it's probably going to be on the 8th level, the bottom of the dungeon. And, dealing with the gremlins and the traps and the badass monsters down there, the Balrons and demons and various, things. And my party's just getting hammered. And I eventually find the Mark Force and start to make my way up out of the dungeon. At that point in time, I wasn't powerful enough to like cast the exit spell, so I'm actually like climbing out. And by the time I get out of I make it out of the dungeon. By the time I get out of the dungeon, everyone in my party is dead except for my cleric. This was a four character party, and everyone was dead except for my cleric. And as you may recall from Ultima 3, those of you watching have played it, clerics are not very well balanced. They basically, as they level up, they're essentially just bags of hit points because they're capped on like strength and dexterity, anything that's going to help as far as like weapon attacks or anything. And there's like one combat spell in the entire cleric spell book, cleric spell O, which I believe was literally called like ZXQUKLLYB. I might be off on a couple letters, but that's like literally what appeared when you cast it. That was a great spell. It was like a nuke spell, and it would destroy like 80 to 90% of everything, all the enemies on the battlefield. But you basically could only cast it once because it took almost the max amount of magic points, magic generated slowly. So at that point, I had spent that magic a long time ago, and when I get down to like just the cleric, the only reason my cleric wasn't already dead and I made it out of the dungeon was because he just had so many hit points and could just lumberjack his way through, some of those last battles, even though he couldn't really do much damage. And so then I'm on the surface, but okay, I'm not out of the woods. I've got to, make it to safety to get the poison cured that I picked up from, probably the ball. And poison was a huge deal in Ultima 3. It's like your hit points are dropping, and I gotta get cured for poison. I gotta get healed, and I'm out of foods from the gremlins, so more hit point tax from the starvation. And the logical thing was, okay, I need to make a beeline for Lord British's castle. And that's what I did, due north. And then of course I'm getting hassled by the overworld mobs, which normally wouldn't be a big deal, but were an incredibly big deal when I'm down to my cleric, running low on hit points, poison, starving, everything else. And I'm getting to the point where I'm like 7 steps away from Lord British's castle. And when I win that last battle, before I finally made it, I was down to dozens of hit points at the point that I reached Lord British's castle and the healer and got cured and everything was like, okay, because even, once I'm in the castle, I'm still getting the hit point tax of the poison and everything else. And it was that down to the wire. And I felt so awesome, having pulled it off, got the Mark of Force, saved the game, all of that. That was just this incredible feeling. And at the time, I didn't know anything about level scaling, but looking back on it, it's like, if dungeons were level scaled, there's no way that scenario would have happened, because I pulled off what was probably like a 1 in 10, 1 in 20 kind of probability thing. Just the RNG alone, when you're ending at dozens of hit points, and this is a game where max level is like 2,500 hit points, so dozens not a lot. There's no way. I mean, with RNG, that scenario just doesn't happen very often, and I lucked out. And level scaling would have adjusted the difficulty in such a way that, I mean, it just I would have succeeded in the mission, but I wouldn't have felt like I was succeeding just by the last inch of my party's life, which created that awesome experience. So when I do game design, I think about that, and I think about, I want the players to have the opportunity, not the requirement, but the opportunity to have an experience like that, if that's what they want to do. I totally agree with the philosophy that I think Stefan mentioned first, and others mentioned as well about, the ideal is you have times where you feel like your party is uber strong and you're kicking butt, and then there's times where you have battles that you just can't win. You get stomped, and then there should be the times in between where, okay, it's challenging, but you're pulling it out sometimes, or maybe not sometimes. It could kind of go either way, and ideally, it happens in sort of this up and down sort of a way. And in an 8-bit game, I don't know of any way to guarantee that experience, but I'm confident that a way to guarantee that that doesn't happen is to do level scaling. So the way I approached it in Nox Archaeus was, I said, okay, not only is there going to be no level scaling in dungeons like the early Ultimate games, but there's also going to be no level scaling on the overworld. And that created some interesting design challenges for how to implement that, because at that point I'm off of the Ultima playbook, because they did overworld level scaling. And what I ended up coming up with was the overworld was going to be divided into zones, and each zone would be inhabited by different kinds of monsters, and those different kinds of monsters, I mean, every monster would have its own stats, and so I could basically, from a large picture design perspective, I mean, literally on the overworld map, I kind of penciled in like, okay, this is like starter area, this is a level 2 area, this is a level 3, this is a level 5. I think I went up to like level 5 out of 10, or maybe 6 out of 10 for like the most difficult stuff in the overworld. And then after I kind of sketched that out, then it was just a matter of defining the mob stats. There's like 100 unique mobs in the game, so I didn't have a shortage of variety. And then in each of these leveled zones, and by leveled I just mean I had decided as a designer that this area of the map you were going to run into level 5 mobs there. I would just pick the individual mobs from the level 5 grouping on the list and put them there. And then dungeons, similar concept. It would be, like, okay, this dungeon is more difficult than that one, a bit easier than that one, and mix that up as well. And the end result being, I thought, well, okay, so the player can, at this point, depending on where they choose to go, they can experience, the uber powerful, stomping. They can experience the overmatched getting stomped, and have the fun, in my opinion, of coming back later and then getting revenge on, whatever, monsters were stomping them, and then have the periods of in between. It's up to the player to find that experience, but it's there. And interestingly, what I ran into, and my memory's a bit blurred between what was coming up in beta testing versus what was coming up like an early release, because it's getting to be, I think, 3 years ago at this point, since release. And I mean, seriously, my memory, it really, like, I'm going back to the code now for Nox 2, and it's like, man, I can't believe how much I've forgotten. So I mean, it's workable. I remember enough, of course, that it kind of comes back. But anyway, on the level scaling, so what seemed to happen was there were definitely players that took to it the way it was set up, and there were definitely also a lot of players that just kind of bounced off of it. They didn't necessarily, I'm not saying they gave up, but would like post a comment on Discord saying like, man, I'm just getting my butt kicked everywhere. And it's not necessarily that they hadn't played the games of yore. I think a lot of it was, in some cases, I think a lot of it was in the cases of maybe people had played games in the 80s, was modern games had conditioned them to level scaling. And so they kind of get to a point of, it's like posting a question about it because they're like, well, what are we doing here? And the way I would handle those questions and some of my beta tester support volunteers as well, what would handle them is basically like, okay, if you're losing badly, that's the game telling you that you're not ready for that area yet. And look at it as a puzzle. There's different places that you can go. And if you're not ready for that area, well, go to a different area, try that. And then ultimately would offer, hints if they wanted them. With the spoiler blackout, on them, basically suggesting like, okay, well, if you're just starting out, hang around here and here. If you're level 2, maybe try here, here, here. If you're level 3, there's always a couple of options because Nox Arcaeus is an open world. You're not on rail tracks where you're going from level 1 area to level 2 area to level 3 area. There are always at least 2, if not 3 or more different areas that you could go to at any, kind of general level range to choose to continue. Is just a matter of, thinking through, okay, well, where have I been? Where have I not been? Have I been in this dungeon yet? What, have I been on level 3 or did I leave at level 2, etc. And that seemed to work out fairly well as far as the people that did engage like that, was just providing them that advice, providing the hints if they wanted to kind of fast track it. I'm sure there's people that totally bounced off of it that never, actually posted anything to get that out there, just like, forget this. I'm sure that happened too. But I think by and large, I'm glad that I stuck to my guns on it, and did not, kind of take I think, as others have described, kind of like the easy way out of doing level scaling. That would definitely have been like the more palatable, I want to go for a wider audience and I don't want to scare people off kind of way to do it. And I can respect that choice for anyone who might choose to do that. I just decided that wasn't the road for me. I wanted to stick to a little bit more of a hardcore difficulty setting, and it seemed to work out in the end. So I'm glad I did.
As I pretty much had the same approach with Realms of Antiquity, where every zone, literally, since my maps are broken up into separate zones automatically, like it just, I have a monster list for each map, common, rares. You can encounter a dragon in some of the starting area maps just because the random thing might roll it up. Which, that's what in a later patch I had introduced that, well, if you flee, it will delete that mob, but it will automatically generate a new one somewhere. So that way they're not just getting away scot-free, but that way they could actually, get rid of a strong opponent that they weren't ready for. But funny enough, what I heard from a lot of my testers was that Nox Arcaeus, like, you could just sit and level up at the start of the game if you were worried, and you just kill the same 2 XP creature over and over until you were maxed out, and that level really impacted your power more than anything else. Whereas with them, particularly what they told me was it's the items. Like, you need to go for the items. Level means nothing. You go just level 1, go for the strong equipment, and you're good. Seems like they like both approaches, though.
Right. They are distinct, and that reminds me of something too that I was going to mention, which is experience or XP level scaling. So that's actually, I have a different view on that, and one that might on its face seem to contradict what Adam said, some of my players said, but we'll sort that out. So what I actually did do XP level scaling in Nox Arcaeus in a certain sense, not in the way that it would be done in a modern game where, like, okay, well, this barbarian is worth 100 XP just because you're level 10 instead of level 2 when you should be encountering that barbarian. Not that. What I did is every mob has a fixed XP value that is like the normal XP that they drop, and if you are fighting a mob and you're lower level than the mob, or I'm sorry, it's not that you're lower level than the mob. If you're higher level than the mob, there's an XP modifier that basically debuffs the XP and it's progressive. And what it's essentially there for is, I didn't want people to farm orcs, times 1,000 and then go, fight the big boss kind of thing. So the way it ends up working is it's a percentage, and it's like if your level is the same, even though there's other things that go into your power like skills and items and stuff and knocks and ability stats, strength, intelligence, dexterity. There is a numerical level of value attached to characters that kind of tracks ish with everything else, and unless the player is doing something really weird and extreme. So I would compare that level of value with the level of value that corresponds with the mobs, because they essentially use the same system. And if the player is the same level, they get basically the book standard XP amount. If the player is one level higher, then it's like 20% less. If the player is two levels higher, then it's 40%. All the way down to on a 10 level scale, if you were level 6 and the mob was level 1, then you get nothing. And I thought, that does not prevent the player from having, the roller coaster experience between uber powerful, uber, getting stomped, and the challenging in between. That doesn't prevent that at all. What that does, in my view, is it encourages the player to kind of move it along. Let's move along the story track here, and actually experience the rest of the game. But at the same time, does not completely remove the ability or the value of grinding. And I think this is where some of the players were coming from that they commented to Adam is, yeah, sure, you can hang out in the beginning of the game and grind yourself up a couple of levels, and it's going to make things easier for the next stage. You can totally do that if that's your jam. No problem at all. You just can't do it indefinitely. At some point, the game kind of nudges you along. So that's the last thing I wanted to mention. Making a distinction on XP level scaling, at least when implemented in that way, as far as how I view things.
Yeah, I thought about doing something similar with Realms of Antiquity, but I don't really have levels for the monsters. It's all that's such as an abstract I used for my own measuring purpose. So I just ended up going, yeah, I'll just make sure that the levels, you sure level up to 16 if you want. You'll just get more hit points and fatigue, but yeah, I thought about doing the same. It would have required me to then put levels on the monsters so that it knew to scale up or scale down.
You don't have a value you can latch on to. That I can see where that makes a difference as well.
I think other Adam, I think you're our last one to answer the question.
Yeah, so it's funny that I pre-write answers for these so that I'm not sitting here and stuttering and trying to think of stuff, and then when you're the last person to go, it's well, that point's been made and that point's been made. And in any case, like so many tools in the RPG dev toolbox, the answer is it depends. It's definitely overused in my opinion. There's a lot of discourse about how not to do it, frequently referencing playing an Elder Scrolls game and running into bandits that are wearing glass armor. Why are you trying to rob me when you're wearing something that's worth more than that entire town? In a lot of games, it's really satisfying to overlevel yourself and stomp through an area. When I played or am replaying Persona 4, for instance, I sometimes find grinding the dungeons to just kind of be meditative. And then I wind up hitting the next dungeon 10 levels higher than it expects. And that's fine. It would be, for me, a lot less fun if that next dungeon scaled to whatever level I was at when I first stepped into it. Which I believe, was it Skyrim that did something like that? Each of the zones level scales you to the level you are the first time you enter that zone.
Is that how that worked on that? I wasn't quite sure because I know I ran into problems where I was very high up in all my combat and magic on that game. And then I started leveling myself up in alchemy and smithing, and suddenly monsters were too hard for me.
And that's a separate problem that I did want to touch on. But yeah, like I don't remember for sure if it was Skyrim, but there was something in that era where the level scaling worked on what level were you when you first stepped into that zone. And so like if Persona did it with something like that, where a dungeon, scaled to the level you are when you first go in there, well, then I just think about how to min max when I go grind the previous dungeon. Like I get to the story beat where dungeon B unlocks, then I go grind dungeon,
Yeah.
And again, that's a choice. A player can choose to grind that or not. There are games where leveling up doesn't feel satisfying because the enemies always scale with you. And others, to the point that Chris just brought up, where leveling up can literally be a trap. And this was, I think, Oblivion primarily ran into this problem, where depending on what skills you worked on and what skills you put points in and such, leveling up might not increase your capabilities in combat at all, but is still increasing the monsters. Anything where doing something that should be an unmitigated good is a trap is an issue.
Then you have like the fun systems like Final Fantasy II, the actual number 2, was only released in Japan, where your characters gained hit points and skill based on they gained hit points based on how hurt they were at the end of combat. So the ideal strategy was to attack your own party members and bring them down to single digits hit points, and then they'd get a buttload of hit points after the end of combat added to their max. And just heal them up and repeat.
Nice. I tend to prefer areas just having the difficulty that they have. And then it comes down to what techniques you employ to guide the player to the right place at the right time, whether it's just like having a guide, World of Warcraft or whatever. Each zone, as you're going through the quests in that zone, the last couple of quests will point you to the next zone up in level. Sometimes, this allows you to use beef gates to let people know where they're not supposed to be yet. It's like, oh, that one bridge to this other area is guarded by a dragon. And then some players are going to try to find some way that they can clip and jump along the mountain at the other edge there and sneak into that area and get to a place they're not supposed to be yet. And, that's a form of fun that, again, some players aren't going to try to do that kind of thing. Some players are going to try to figure out, how to beat this dragon 6 levels younger than you're supposed to. Some players are going to try to figure out how to run between the dragon's legs. And some players are going to just be like, oh, well, that's obviously a sign that I'm not supposed to be here yet, and go and play as intended.
Some players just want to kill Lord British.
Absolutely.
Well, and if I can jump in on that, sometimes we do that like snake round thing, because if you've played Divinity Original Sin, it has all placed monsters. Everything's placed. And there's a part where I got to that I'd taken out everything. Everything was dead except the next section I had to go into, and it was too hard for me. And I couldn't figure it out until I'm like, oh, he wants me to sneak. That's the trap where sometimes they're like trying to force you into something. And you're like, oh no, I'm not supposed to be here yet, is the message I got from running into that wall and then going, oh,
right.
Try and tell me something else.
So Dark Unknown does a little bit of world levels, the overworld map level scaling, similar to, but not quite how the old Ultimas did it. Like I mentioned when it came up, yeah, like Ultima 4, I think when the game gets to like 7,000 steps taken or something like that, the spawners on the overworld, like the tables that they draw from for what mobs spawn in different parts of the overworld, shifts to higher level monsters. That feels dangerous to me. I don't like a game that can scale in a way where suddenly it has become too hard to be fun. And so like a quote unquote bad player that is just taking a really long time to level up and is just, you know, screwing up constantly because they don't play these kinds of games very often because it's 1980, you know, and there weren't that many of these games yet or whatever. So I do level up the overworld with the player somewhat. Narratively, this is you know, this is the clock. This is the enemy is also getting stronger and is able to, you know, impose its will on the world more, and so is adding, you know, more demons show up, whatever. You know, it's kind of similar, you know, in Ultima 7, you get the orrery at some point through the game that shows you where the planets are, and the Guardian is trying to come through at the moment of the planetary alignment. Well, the planets fully align the moment you get to the Guardian's throne room, regardless of how long it took you to get there. But you know, it's the whole problem people joke about. It's just like, oh, the main quest is the world's going to end in a week. Go do the fishing mini game for 16 days and collect all these cards and play card games with NPCs in the towns, you know, and the clock doesn't actually progress.
Yeah.
But that's a separate thing.
I assure you, Mr. Bond, we're in a cutscene and the bullets are very lethal.
Right. Yes. Gameplay cutscene thing is its own whole thing.
You bring up one thing you mentioned to remind me of something. World level scaling, like the old Ultimates did, can have another problem. I actually encountered this in Tears of the Kingdom, is that because there, after you've played again so long, it levels up, it lets the monsters get to their maximum level, which is like silver. But if you recall, Tears of the Kingdom added a lot more items for their little level up system to get your armor up. And I ran into the problem where I needed like boss bokoblin teeth, and I needed the lowest level one. But everywhere I went, only silvers were generating. So that they didn't have that problem in Breath of the Wild because they didn't have as much itemization. But that was one that was like, oops, you kind of. Now I have to basically run everywhere and hope after every blood moon that maybe a regular one spawns so that I can finally level up this armor to the next tier and then go and get the silver bokoblin stuff for the next tier, you know?
Right. Yeah, and Dark Unknown, rather than having zones to the map, I kind of went to what I was kind of used to from back when I was a developer on one of the Ultima Online emulators, which is to say I placed spawners. And so literally the spawners level up. So each time each spawner will take a turn every somewhere between 35 and 75 ticks in the game. I've played enough muds that I do think of them as ticks. Yeah. And each time the spawner goes, it checks to see how many monsters that spawner already has in the world. each spawner will only spawn, 2 to 4 monsters. And then checks to see if the player has leveled up and if that's a level where the spawner changes what it does. And I made a recent change where monsters no longer wander as far from their spawners as they used to. I was having issues where I had a monster spot that spawned over here, wandered all the way over here, which I thought was going to be really interesting, but was just causing issues. Like I was getting swarmed by tons of monsters as I'm trying to get to the next plot thing and in my own play tests. And I'm like, this is not as much fun. So not only do the spawners level up the level of monster they spawn, but once they get to a certain point, they finally, many of them, but not all of them, unlock how far the monsters will travel from that spawner. So finally, at one point, everything will just go everywhere because it's just you're in the end game now. Now, if the world is going to get more dangerous on a narrative clock, I would rather do it in lockstep with the party level than with hitting plot points or with an actual clock, whether real time or steps or whatever, just because it's really frustrating when a game becomes unwinnable at 10,000 turns and you don't realize it until 9,000 turns and it's already too late for you. You've got 6 saved games, but in all of them, it's already too late for you to fix the problem. You have to start over or you have to go way back.
Dead man walking scenario.
Yeah.
A lot of text adventures did that and it was not fun.
No, because you're wasting time. You're wasting the player's time from the moment they lost.
And to tie this back to one of the things that I said in the previous point about things that seem like bad game design, but are in really well-beloved games, and so you have to think about it, Star Control 2 absolutely does this, but is also one of the most beloved games like in that wide genre. So you have to consider like how generous, like how badly do you have to screw up to get into that situation? How is the average player not going to notice that that was a possibility because it's really hard to back yourself into that corner? So that's a thing. Much like some roguelikes or whatever, and as a point that Adam 1 was making, the progression of strength in Dark Unknown is very item based. There's not even that many items, but much like Ultima 4, where there's like 6 melee weapons, and your strength is very much dictated by which of those weapons you have, versus Ultima 3, where they forgot to check which weapon you had. One of my favorite bug stories ever. And so the progression for levels is at each level, you can spend a couple of skill points or a couple of training points to increase your strength, dex, or int. And then, ranged weapons have a minimum dex requirement and armor has a minimum strength requirement. And so you can make choices about which things you get stronger in when, and int gives you just the ability to cast more spells and your spells are stronger. I do think it's important, regardless of what kind of scaling you're doing, not necessarily to the extent of having quite as many knobs to twiddle as Chris was saying, but having a story mode. There's some way to let people experience the game if they're not interested in being good at combat.
Yeah.
I do feel is important. I am absolutely not in line with the people that, think get good or you don't get to experience the game. The other big question is how important is the tactical level to the gameplay experience that you're trying to do. You know, in XCOM, that's the game.
Right.
And this is a point that is going to come up again for the next question as well. So like both how much of the progression through the game is based on the story and how much of it is based on you know, doing well with tactical combat. Like my housemate is playing Unicorn Overlord. As far as, you know, like the tactical combat level being a significant amount of the game. And then there's also like how many knobs can you twiddle as you are progressing? Is there a skill system? Are there feats? Are there perks that you can be taking? Is it possible to, again, take skills and perks that are not actually important to the combat level to get you, you know, so you level up and you take your alchemy or whatever. But just the last really quick thing is that sometimes it can be fun. Like, I don't place all of my loot myself. Sometimes in my playthroughs, I happen to find a longsword a lot earlier than usual. And whether or not that's fun or, you know, screws with your feeling of level progression is something that you can tweak, and where your game falls on that really helps with whether or not various forms of level scaling will work for you.
Yeah. All right. We are going to move on to question 3, which is CRPGs with a party design offer sometimes either the option to create a party from scratch or you could have potential companions in the narrative that join the party. Do you favor one or the other? How do you feel about it? And we're going to start with Stefan, who needs to take off pretty quick here.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. And thanks for that that exploration in the last question there, other Adam. Yeah, so well, I just want to start because I do have to get going, but I want to start by just something that is on my mind. You know, joining these roundtables and having these conversations really reminds me how much fun this hobby or career is. So thank you, you know, all for this opportunity to participate in this. It's really lovely. I enjoy it a lot. And speaking of hobbies, the reason why I'm going to have to run away is that my other hobby happens to be pool, and I have a tournament this weekend, and it's a big tournament, and it's starting in a bit here, so I'm gonna have to sign off and run off and go play it. I'll let you guys know how it goes, though.
Good luck.
I was recently in
Good luck,
Vegas playing with a partner, and 160 teams. We came in third, so
Nice.
you know, definitely enjoy it a lot. But anyway, so the question is about party members. It's a really great question because there's this nostalgic you know, experience that I have of designing my parties that I really love. But then there's the experiences of story-based party members like in Ultima that I really have a strong connection with. When I think of Ultima, instantly like Iolo and characters come to mind. And I don't have that connection with those other games where I designed parties. You know, so it's just a different experience. The interesting thing about this question, the way it is worded, is CRPGs with a party design offer either the option to create a party from scratch or introduce a narrative. And I think there's a lot of fun in exploring how those two can come together. So it's not necessarily one or the other. I'm not going to sit here and say that I've mastered that in World of Antera. That's sort of yet to be seen, but definitely having some control over party member progression, but yet having them be story based, I think is an important aspect of CRPGs, because you're managing stats and progression. Having control and decision over that or agency over that's a really important part of role playing. And so I think the more it's present in party members, the better. So I'm not a fan of games that just level up party members. JRPGs do this a lot where they just level up. You know, I like to design, you know, the party members are extension of your player character. They're extension of you in the game world, whether they're story based or not. So having the ability to sort of design that, I think, is important. But yeah, it's a really good question because it had me thinking about like when I'm rolling, you know, in Bard's Tale, when I'm rolling, you know, for all my characters, or whether, and then the sort of counterpoint was Ultima. You know, it's these little details we often don't think about, but then when you're a game designer, you're confronted with these questions, and, you know, obviously coming to this roundtable is part of what makes this so fun. So yeah, so thank you all. I apologize I can't stay to hear your responses, but I can listen to the recording, so I will be looking forward to that. And we're going to be back on, I guess, in July, right? Or June, somewhere around there.
We haven't
be
set
back.
a particular date yet, but I'm certainly up for sometime in the summer. We can
Cool.
again. So, well, good luck to you on the tournament, Stefan, and congrats on coming in third in the nationals. That's so awesome.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Yep. All right, gentlemen, have a good day. I'll talk to you soon.
Right. Take care.
Bye.
Good luck.
Okay, and then there were 4. Who wants
Guess
to
you
go
can,
next?
guess you can roll the die now.
Well, now we'll have to switch to the D4, which they have changed the D4 now. It's actually more like a, it's not symmetrical.
Oh, interesting.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's less of a caltrip now.
Rolled a 1, looks like it's Chris.
Oh, good. I want to just kind of follow up on what he was saying about he doesn't feel a connection to his characters like he did in Ultima. And Ultima, of course, is sort of, all of us, I'm sure, have that connection where we immediately know Dupre, Shimino, Iolo, or Yolo, or however he pronounces that. And so, yeah, that's a really strong argument for created characters. Now, name another game and created character you care about. Go.
Baldur's Gate 2.
Which one? Minsk.
I mean, I also just ran a D&D game where the party met Chihira.
Okay. Yeah. And my example was going to be like Pillars of Eternity. Eder and I are rolling till the end of time. I can't name you anyone else in that game. Without looking it up, I cannot name you another soul in that game. So if you're going to do that, you have to do it well. You have to make them be something you care about or are interested in. I do have created characters that I've carried from game to game to game to game to game, but that's why I remember them. They weren't unique to a game. They were unique to me. And being able to create them in that way and carry them through. Like if you look at Bard's Tale 2 did it, Deathlord did it, you could import characters from Ultima 3. Like you could literally go to another person's game and pull the characters out and shove them in your own game, which I think is awesome, but also, yeah, I don't know. It kind of doesn't feel the same. So I have these personal characters I have attachments to that I want to put in my new games. The bigger problem I wonder about with it is I'm a new player. How do I design a party that will succeed? And how do I not trap myself and build 4 fighters, not knowing you've enclosed the entire end of your game in magical fields? Like you can destroy yourself in character creation if you pick a bad set of balance. So like in Ultima 3, the character classes almost don't matter. I mean, there's some you should have, but if you wanted to go 4 fighters, you'd succeed. You could do it. You could pull it off. But that's a tough balance. That's really hard to do. I do like games like Bard's Tale where they split the difference. And Bard's Tale 4 lets you actually use tokens to bring people into your party, but also in the earlier Bard's Tales, you could, charm a monster or summon Fred or do something like that and have them, or Herb or any of those guys in your party, and that was nice too. So I'm just looking at my notes here about this. Yeah, summon Herb.
I love that summon Fred thinking of Bard's Tale because summon Fred for Fred. That's actually Nox Arceus, which was inspired by Summon
Summoner, right?
Interchangeable like that.
They-
My work here is done.
They jumble together over time. They
Yeah.
really do. But yeah, like Ultima 3, you made your own characters. And my friend and I, in the book, it said, or find people from the countryside to join you. We spent our entire time playing it, trying to figure out what they meant by that, because you couldn't have anyone join your party in Ultima 3, but you ran into those characters. And I think that's almost a more interesting concept that might be worth talking about sometime. We're not going to do it here, I'm sure, but how do you build the lore and build your characters? Because Ultima had some of those characters built before they joined your party. Shamino and Dupre and Yolo have been in there almost all the way back for some of them. And so we knew them before they joined. It made it easier to have them join, but something like Pillars of Eternity or Baldur's Gate or something like that, where we didn't know them before, kind of harder to make that connection. There's some stranger that I may or may not like and now have to deal with.
Unless
And other,
they're
sorry.
68, then you cut them a break then, right? If they're NPC 68.
Yeah, they're NPC 68, then they get to stay forever. The other question is, how many people are you making for your party when you start the game? If I'm making 4, that's probably fine. But if I'm a new person coming in, I don't know what I'm doing, and I have to make 8 characters, I'm going to be bored before I start the game. So you have to have some there or someone to join or something. And the only other thought I have is Stefan said it, where the other characters are an extension of your main character. Are you a main character or are you a group of characters? In Ultima, I am the character, and not even exaggerating. It's supposed to be me.
Right.
So I'm not going to have 8 me's, and that makes sense. But in Bard's Tale, it's not supposed to be me. It's these characters. And so I want characters I want, not what the dev has told me I need to have. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that. I will let's kick over to Mark.
All right. Well, this is another topic that I definitely have some strong, at least preferences on. I when it came to level scaling, I think to some extent I feel like there's almost kind of like a right and wrong way to do it, or at least when it comes to level scaling, many ways for that to be implemented badly, more ways for it to be good. On the party makeup, I'm a little bit more, I think, open-minded, but definitely have a preference nonetheless. And I would say it leans towards finding characters, and there's a number of reasons why. One is it promotes exploration. It's yet just another reward that the player can get. Really a pretty big one. And you're early on, and you've got 1, maybe 2, and then you find that that wizard who starts at level 3. Or so, I mean, that's a significant reward for exploration, assuming that they're placed well. And with that wizard, I'm thinking of a Nox Arceus. That's one that I actually I stuck a wizard in a dungeon, so it's like you had be going down the path of one of the quests and solving it and exploring a dungeon, and then you get that opportunity for that join up. So yeah, I see it as an extension of exploration. And additionally, something else I thought about, because this wasn't an automatic decision for me with Nox Arceus that it was going to be that way, where players join you. Certainly that's how Ultima 4 and 5 did it. But beyond like the tile graphical system, I really did think about each mechanic individually and not just say, well, that's what Ultima did. A lot of times I went that way, but it wasn't an automatic, and nor was it with this decision. And you know, one of the principles that I tried to adhere to with designing Nox Archaeus was to apply modern sensibilities to the design. Make it, you know, keep the old school feel, but apply modern sensibilities and try to find that balance. And that is, you know, you all talked about a number of dimensions to that. What I see as modern sensibilities in the conversation here, respecting the player's time, you know, being a big one. And so I thought about how, as I think you mentioned, Chris, like, yeah, you if you have to create a party of 6, 8, I mean, even if it was only 4 characters and I really wanted 6, because for whatever reason, I feel like that's like the ideal party size. That could be a whole other question for one of our round tables.
It really could.
I feel like Chris, you and I were talking about that in email the other day, so we already got it started. But yeah, you're creating 8, 6, even 4 characters through like the traditional, you know, you're rolling for them and this and that. That's a lot of time. And I did that with many games back in the old days. And you know, I have done it in the modern era, playing retro games, but I've always felt it like a little bit of a, at least a little bit of a friction point for me. It's like, yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna like this game, and you know, some we play better than others, and here I got essentially hours into the process of, you know, getting the party set up, and you know, thinking in that lens, I'm thinking like, is this really, you know, from a modern sensibility standpoint, is this really the best move there? And I can see this one from multiple points of view. So, you know, total respect to developers who made a different decision on this. From my point of view, I think this is an opportunity to make Nox Archaeus more accessible without compromising the old school feel, which I felt confident of because Ultima did it. So this is a roundabout sort of way. It's like I made the find the character's decision not because Ultima did it, but when I came up for a rationale for why I wanted to do it that way, I was able to feel confident that it wasn't going to compromise the other goal of maintaining old school feel, because I saw it worked in Ultima and it worked fine. And another element that kind of factored into that whole thought process, again, you know, modern sensibilities, etc., is I happened to read some article or post or something during Nox Archaeus development around the time when I was making this decision, and it talked about a concept that was pioneered by somebody at Micropro Software. I don't think it was Sid Meier himself, but one of his contemporaries there, involved in the Civilization games. I believe it was called the upside down pyramid of decision making. And described in the Civilization context is, so at the beginning of the game, we give them a settler unit, and that's it. You've got a very limited number of decisions that you can make, that the player can make and that they have to think about. And so they don't get overwhelmed. Okay. And then there's a few tutorial prompts, you know, build a city, etc. Okay. So now you've built a city. Now, you know, you're the next tier up on the pyramid. There's a few more decisions that you can make now relating to manage that city. And next thing you know, you built another settler and you built another city, and then you built some infantry, and that the decision making just expands and expands along with the game. And I thought, you know, that makes a lot of sense from an accessibility standpoint, which tying into the modern sensibilities, respecting people's time, you know, all of those different things. It just felt like a solid fit, you know, for that, you know, someone's just gonna jump into Nox Archaeus and maybe they've never even played an 80s retro RPG, or if they have, it's been a long time, and they're just going to dive in and not read the manual and whatever. The best thing I could possibly do for them, I thought, was don't overwhelm them with decisions. And so you can get Nox Archaeus started in like 5 minutes because you're not rolling for stats. It's basically, what's the name, pick your race, which has very little to do with anything. There's a small skill buff and you're done and you're in the game. Yeah, so that, and then that I believe also led me to thinking about like, okay, in an 8-bit context, could I actually do some kind of a tutorial, which is, not something I remember being done, but it was like, well, 8-bit games, we can put text in places and and I like the idea of you step on this tile, it displays some text. I'd already made that mechanic from a story standpoint for a variety of things. It's like, well, okay, so if we apply that inverse pyramid and have the player start with one character, have them start in a confined space. I suppose a shipwreck, but could have been something else. So you can kind of predict. Here's this open world game, but yet at the beginning it's very linear. There's just they're going to be in the hold of the ship, and then they're going to be on the ground level deck, and I could very predictably know where the player was going to go, and use this text trigger prompt that was built into the engine for story purposes later on. Basically, just set some state flags so that that would create these tutorial prompts as the player went through the first action, saying, "Hey, you might want to open that chest over there," or press T to talk to the pirate over there. And again, all of that being said, I am glad to live in a world where both styles exist, because I think there's something to be gained from both of them. And there are games of the 80s that RPGs of the 80s where it was the style of creating all the party of characters. I'm thinking Wizardry, I'm thinking Bard's Tale. Those were a very different experience than Ultima was, and a fun one in its own right. I'm not quite sure. I mean, Wizardry and Bard's Tale wouldn't be what they were if the character creation wasn't what it was. It was an integral part of it, and I enjoyed those games. Very glad they exist, and modern retro games that are looking back. I can totally appreciate that some will draw their inspiration from that model and do that. So I do like to re-experience that from time to time as well. But anyway, that's my views on it, and kind of a little bit of why I made those design decisions in Nox Chaos. So at this point, it's over to either Adam or Adam. How about Adam, Realms of Antiquity?
All right. So obviously, if you play Realms of Antiquity, I offer both. You can both create a party, or you can find companions. I borrowed a nice little trick from old Tunnels of Doom on the TI by having it, if you have a single character party, you can play a unique class that is stronger than all the rest. A lot of guys call it the Avatar experience. Like, if you want or easy mode was the other term I've heard. But the reason I went that way is, one, I really wanted tactical combat. The size of the party is limited to 4 because my battle maps are only an 8x8 size grid, and I didn't want to have. If you have 6 people in a party, it starts getting a little crowded on the screen. So I had to limit it to 4, and a long time ago I read how the original Final Fantasy on the Nintendo guys like to do Iron Man competitions. Since that was the only Final Fantasy you could actually create a party in, they would make a whole party of white mages or black mages, and they would like see who could win the game with the craziest combination of parties. And I thought that's cool. And plus, if I do it, then you can set the size of your party, then you can mix and match and do any number of combos. And in fact, I have a couple guys who have basically played through the whole game solo with every single class and won. So, but I also like narrative. I don't know if you guys remember Baldur's Gate 1, your constant companion, Emoin. Like, you know, she's always in your party no matter what. She's easy to level up into a magic user, which is great because Baldur's Gate 1 does not have any general magic users. They're all specialists, which meant they were restricted on spell usage in certain areas. But I really liked the Baldur's Gate experience of being able to put your party together. Of course, I didn't like the fact that two of the first recruitable companions you meet are both evil. It's like, well, I guess you're an evil character that works. But then Icewind Dale came out, and Icewind Dale, you could make a full party of 6. You could do anything you wanted, and that thing was just raw combat. I mean, they had a story, but you were just following the rail. You knew it was a rail. We one dungeon to the next. Figured out that you could cast fireball at the edges of the line of sight and kill enemies before they even got a chance to see you. They eventually patched that so they would go active if they got hit. But I remember Icewind Dale was actually I've won Icewind Dale. I did not win Baldur's Gate. I eventually got bored of the narrative and kind of fell out of it. But Icewind Dale, I played all the way to the end. That thing is just a grind fest, but it's so satisfying, the tactical combat and going back and forth. And that is one thing old Ultima really lacked. They might have had a tactical screen, but there weren't very many tactics.
It was a rather tactic-free zone, that tactic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know, coupled with the fact that at one point it was like monsters could move diagonally and you couldn't because or something.
Which, you know, when designing the algorithm for mob movement, I remember a light bulb moment where it's like, okay, I see exactly why they did it. It was easier. It was less memory.
Mhm.
You know, all of that. But yet, nonetheless, I get it. It's like for players, even if you balance that into the equation for players, they still feel like it's unfair. And so I for that reason I took the extra steps to prevent them from moving diagonally.
Yeah, I did the same. Part of it is that basically moving diagonally, you're actually moving almost 1.5 squares. And in wargaming for years, what they've done is they just said, okay, you can move once diagonally for 1, but the next time it's 2. Like you basically they do that to prevent it from becoming an overwhelming tactical advantage. Or they use hex maps because hex maps you move an equal distance in 6 directions. So
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, if the player can move diagonally, then it's all's fair, right?
But yeah, it definitely lends itself to some weirdness with 2-dimensional tactical combat. So I wanted to give that option, but I also especially after I went to the memory expansion and had plenty of memory, I was like, but it's kind of fun to also find recruitable companions. So I decided to go that route, and I gave them personalities. Like one of the wizard, I kind of remembered Perceptor from the old Transformers cartoon. But funny enough, only in the movie, he was constantly talking using massive $10 words, and everyone is like, okay, can you say what that actually means now, please? So I decided like he's using massive big words all the time, and then your player goes, huh? And then he simplifies it. So I thought that was a fun trade. And the thief kit was definitely kind of based on Imoen and meant to be like, hey, a thief is useful in the game, and she's right here in the starting area or near to it. So it was kind of fun adding extra dialogue and things for all the characters as you go along. That did create the problem, though, that I realized that they could leave the party potentially, but what about if you have created members? Like, you know, what's the explanation for that? So I kind of, in the intro, I basically say, oh, well, there's other guys here too, and they're like you, and they don't know what's going on, and they agree you're the leader, you know? So that way, that's how I kind of dealt with am I a group of characters or am I one character? I leave it to you to decide which one of your created characters is in fact you.
Mm-hmm.
And they did, but the problem with that is that now it's like, well, it would suck if you could add and remove party members, because then it's like, yeah, we're moving on without you there, Bob. Sorry. Hope you survive in this weird fantasy world, you know. So I had to kind of restrict that.
Well, that was going to be my question for you guys as sort of a follow-up side to this is how do you feel about games like Ultima 3, Bard's Tale, or even Ultima 5 where you could like shove them in the inn.
Oh,
Like-
I guess I always kind of liked it. I didn't really use the mechanic all that much, but I like it in that the model where you're finding characters, at least, because it's to me it's like if a game where you find characters, there should be more characters to find than you have slots in your party, so you're making choices.
Right.
Well, I like the ability to essentially like undo the choice. It's like, well, okay, but now I found somebody better. That sorry, you know.
That's like Baldur's Gate 1, where those first two people that join you are not necessarily matched to your alignment.
Right.
Well, sure, yeah, you have the alignment. There's a whole other dimension of decisions there. So yeah, I guess I'd have a hard time from a design standpoint feeling good about a find your party design if you didn't have an in mechanic to be able to swap them out. To me, it's like a hand in hand sort of a thing. What?
I mean, I thought about doing well, I think hostel is the common term I've heard used for it, because they had to do that in the Ultima 4 on the NES, because they could only have 4 characters because of sprite limitations, but you still had to recruit all of them, and so you would just leave them in the hostel, and then have a party of 4 at all times. But yeah, I thought about it, but then it was just like, I can't narratively explain this. Are they just supposed to, at the end game, when you go back home, will they all suddenly show up? You know, how am I supposed to handle that? And I should add that one of my testers, she actually was very emotional when she finished the game, because she really got having the character say goodbye to her. It was really something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's always nice when you can get an emotional response, and that is something you get from the narrative characters as opposed to created ones. I mean, it's 2 different game styles. I'm just tactical. I want to play and fight and get into fun combats, or I'm following the story, you know?
Right. Yeah, lucky Ultima 4 NES players that they only had to deal with 4 characters. I mean, 8 was just too much, especially you get into the abyss, and I remember like one of those first rooms, you've got like all this lava, and then the single file bridge going across it, and like, am I going to sit here and take my time to get all the characters in a I said, screw it, I just walked over the lava.
Yep, exactly. So I'll turn it over to other Adam to wrap this one up.
So once again, the answer is, it depends on the game. The more complex the tactical layer, the more it makes sense to let the player make the party they want to, which basically just is repeating some stuff that Adam said. I feel like there's kind of 3 ways to do this. One of them is the player makes the party from scratch. The party does not make the player. The player makes the party from scratch, like Icewind Dale 2, or go back to Bard's Tale, or the other main example that I think falls into the category, but I think nobody happens to mention, which is Might and Magic. Where in Bard's Tale, like in Bard's Tale 2 or 3, you had your party of 6, and then there were these 2 phantom slots that could be filled by summons. Whereas like Might and Magic, you made 6 people, but then you ran around and filled the other 2 slots by hiring hirelings.
Yep.
And there was this kind of feeling of progression when you get to the point where you could find like this guy costs 30,000 gold a day or whatever, but is the super high level wizard or whatever it was. And yeah, like Icewind Dale 2 was very much about letting you play 3rd edition D&D on the tactical map, and less about the story and getting to know your party members and such. And so you just made your own party the whole way through.
That reminds me of one thing also about Magic Candle I liked, but I didn't end up implementing, was you have all the NPCs and you recruit them into your party, and then that way you would have control and you could let them go if, well, no, we need somebody else now, you know.
I thought that was such a cool mechanic, doing the interviews and talking to them and deciding who you like.
Mhm.
That's, I didn't mention this in mine, but that's one of my gripes about finding characters. And Adam, you brought it up with the first two are evil, or you have to take characters in the order that the developer has breadcrumbed them out for you, or you will not have enough power to get to the next part of the story. And that can be okay if that's what you're building, but it's not necessarily fun for me.
So option 2 is that the game provides companions that exactly fill out the party. Like Ultima 4, which has no intra-party interaction. It's too early, for people, for you, it wasn't until the later games in the series where you could talk to someone that had joined you. But it at least guarantees that you have a balanced mix of classes by the time you get to the end.
Mm-hmm.
For very, very broad definitions of balanced, since 90% of players probably just killed off Jeffrey and Katrina because they were so bad at ranged weapons, especially in the Abyss. But then there's also like the Persona series, where calling it exactly fill out the party is weird, because like those, and this is more common in JRPG space, is where you have a party that might be like 10 people, and then when you go to each dungeon it says, okay, which 4 go in? And then there might be like a campfire halfway through where you can swap out who's going through this party. And then you have the question of, as was brought up before, like, are the people who aren't in your party also just leveling up ambiently? Like Persona 5, that was a perk. As you developed one of your social links, the bonus you got was party members that are not with you in this dungeon are getting 25 and then 50 and then 75 and then 100% of the XP that the people actually in the party are getting. Whereas back in like Persona 3 or 4, you would juggle, oh, okay, this person's falling behind, so I'm going to take them in this time so that they keep up. Or I'm just going to accept that I'm never taking them again because they're going to fall so far behind that they're never useful again.
It is an interesting corollary, the whole experience party systems. In old school systems, it was I remember the pain in Ultima 3, like the wizard and the cleric could cast their spells and kill all the goblins and skeletons instantly and rack up the XP, because for some insane reason he decided to make it last hit gets the XP.
Well, and the thing about clerics was that until they got to the point where they could cast that one combat spell, clerics had a hugely hard time getting XP because they were spending their resources healing the people that were doing the fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And so you would have to go out of your way to, they were a pain in the ass.
That's the way in which I thought was to literally go have my cleric go kill other clerics in the town of you, and XP up. Get it done.
Depopulating the one town that had no guards was a strat that I never thought of at the time, and was appalled and intrigued to discover is such a common strat for playing through Ultima 3. Because I was certainly far too goody-goody to think about going in and min-maxing by slaughtering a town. Robbing Death Gulch blind was, of course, necessary, but...
Which is, of course, necessary. I got totally ruined in terms of my moral compass when it came to playing games, because I learned from my 2 older brothers and watching them play Ultima 3. And their version of playing Ultima 3 was, like get to a certain level of power and then just like wholesale slaughter an entire town, kill all the guards, kill everything. And in Lord British's castle, even shoot him with a cannon on the frigate,
Sure.
And so the way I learned, it's like, oh, this is just like what you do. Oh yeah, there's this thing you can technically win the game, but here's like this other activity. And so yeah, which was a real jolt when Ultima 4 came out. To being like, whoa, the game is actually going to like
be mad at you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
I adjusted to it and had fun. But one of my older brothers that I learned that other play style from, he just like totally rage quit Ultima 4. It's like, I'm not doing this.
Yeah, I heard Richard Gary had talked about that he'd get letters from guys going like, I don't get it. I can't win the game. And it's like they just went and killed everybody in all the towns as usual and didn't
Yeah.
understand that they tanked their virtues.
Right.
And that they got rid of all the ways you can. I think you can only gain humility consistently by talking to one NPC in Jellum.
It was
Mhm.
hard. Yeah.
And guards in Lord British's castle. But
Yeah.
In any case, the third option is the game provides so many NPCs that one of the reasons to replay the game is to experience doing it with a different party. Baldur's Gate 2 is, my go-to for this. And my problem with it is every time I try to play it with a different party, I'm like, oh, but how can I play this game without Minsk? And then I wind up with like only 2 slots that are fungible. And then it's like, why am I bothering? Like I tried playing once as an evil party and I just couldn't do it. I'm just not built that way. But
or you have something like I had with Pillars of Eternity, which each of them has their own ending. So I would I'd make sure one player gets their ending, and then I would put them back at the end and grab the next one out because I wanted everyone to have their best ending. And so I ended up playing with everyone because I just switch them in and out.
Yeah, and in Baldur's Gate 2, they while they all get a little narrative bit at the end, but they all have their mid-game quest per person. And so you would like go and recruit Nalia to your party and do her quest, but then kick her out because she's redundant with Imoen and get somebody else. But you want to have that keep or whatever. And it's interesting. Like, I think that there's a very interesting discussion to be had about the different ways to generate replay value. And like, as more and more games come out and my backlog of stuff that I haven't played gets longer and longer, I start to appreciate games that let you experience the whole damn thing the first time through.
Yep.
I start to appreciate not feeling like, okay, I got to the end of the game, but I missed half of it because it was not possible to experience all of these other party. There's so many bits of intra-party dialogue, even if they don't change the game fundamentally, but just hearing Jihira and Imoen chatting when you make camp or whatever is like, for some people it's great because it means that they can go in and they can replay with a different set of people and it feels like you're playing it again and you get to experience the game differently. Or you might decide to play the game, okay, this time I'm going to play it as a thief and try to sneak through stuff instead of, depending on the game, obviously that's not so much a Baldur's Gate 2 thing. But versus, okay, I've played it, I'm done, I want to go do something else now. I guess Skyrim's a good example of people who re-roll and play the game again with try to get a different experience and then wind up being a stealth archer every time anyway. But an interesting, like, these aren't widely like walled off categories. Like Planescape Torment is somewhere between 2 and 3. You've got slots for 5 people besides the nameless one in your party, and there's 7 people that can join. So, and 2 of them actually you might just miss. Like, it's real easy to play through the entirety of Planescape Torment and never notice Nodrum or Vylar. And so there's some want to go through and redo it to mix and match the party, but there's less. Like Baldur's Gate 2, the combinatorics of all of the different combinations of people that can be in your party and can talk to each other, it's like it's impossible to ever see all of it. And as much as I love and hate there being this giant group of people, and in as much as I want to see all the interactions. Yeah, I don't feel a big need to make 90% of the game the same and try to get people to replay it to see the remaining 10%. I think the other reason that I could never do number 3 is that it's too much. As a solo, like if I had a team, but I just mentioned how big the combinatorics is for different collections of party members and who wants to talk to who and chime in when what conversations are happening. That's way too much content to make that only comes up in 10% of the games each to be something that I want to dedicate time to if I don't have a whole team of people making stuff. Now, Dark Unknown specifically has no party. This stems originally from the fact that the game, before I turned it into what it is now, was just straight up a prequel to Ultima 1, and Ultima 1 had no party. You didn't have a party until 3, and you didn't recruit people until 4. This is kind of the one place where I refused to feature creep. Many other decisions that I made when I first started, like no NPC schedules, no time or whatever, feature creep destroyed that. I kind of can't feature creep this, to be perfectly honest, because for the first third of development, I was very careful to write all my code, not assuming that you didn't have other party members. So I didn't check, is this the PC doing this interaction, but would check, is this a mob with the PC trait? And eventually, just for, because it was more convenient, I have lazily not been that careful anymore. And so now if I were to add a party, I would need to rewrite 2/3 of the code base. So I'm just saving that for the next game.
Yeah, I've done that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, save it for the next.
And
I haven't had to start disciplining myself.
And I had considered, once I finished the game, having the next project be port it to Unity, and then Unity did its whole thing. And so then I considered making it try to port the game to Godot. And because I need to rewrite so much of the code base before the next time anyway. And so, Chris, if you manage to write an Ultima like in Godot, I would love to hear what the best practices are when I get to that point.
Yeah, as I'm learning, stay in touch.
Absolutely. So, yeah, it comes down to, again, tactical versus narrative versus how much of the narrative is the world and how much is bringing your characters through. Like the game that I really, I talked about this, I'm sure, in past roundtables a little bit, but the other game that I really wanted to make and I decided that literally didn't feel like a good enough storyteller to do. But I want to see, I have really enjoyed the Persona series. It has its flaws, but there's a lot that I like about it. Persona 4 in particular, progressing through the game is about interacting with other people and making their lives better. That's the whole game. That and dungeon crawls. I want the Ultima 4 Persona mix where rather than I started this as a short story once and then considered it as a game, and I don't think I can write it. But where at each town you find somebody who needs help with that virtue and you interact with them over the course of the game and build them up and learn as they're learning. And then it's each of these people get to, rank 10 compassion or something. Once you've done that with everybody, hey, look, you are an avatar now. I would love to see that game. I don't think I could write it. But if the narration is primarily like it is for me, obviously since I don't have a party, going through the story and the plot and interacting with the people in the world, I try to have people in the world that you interact with enough that the player will get attached to them. you know, the antagonist of the first half of the game is your brother. You know, I let you make your character, but I put you in a specific situation. And so I think it is like having a party, and particularly a party where you recruit people, makes it easier to feel attached to specific people. And I do find it fascinating how attached people do get to YOLO and Dupre and Chamino and such, given that it takes until like Ultima 7 before they really have personalities.
Yeah.
But people got attached to them way before that. And that's very interesting to me, and I don't really have an explanation for that. But in any case, that's most of what my thoughts on that. Again, it depends. Any of them you can do right, and any of them you can do wrong.
I would add that one other thing players like to do when they have narrative companions is, of course, romance them.
An excellent point.
Yes. Even though Baldur's Gate 3 is the most well-known of this, mainly because they just made it go, like, apparently they had a bug that made them get amorous with you too fast.
But just the horniest.
Until well after release, they didn't notice the bug.
I don't think they fixed the bug.
No, they did not. I'm sitting here, you know, oh yeah, Shadowheart. I'm getting out. Wait, Gail, what are you doing? No, Gail, I don't roll that way, Gail.
Slow down.
I mean, like when Chris asked which Baldur's Gate 2 character do you immediately think of, and he answered it, oh, Minsk. But for me, my other answer is Aerie, because that's the character that I romanced in my playthrough.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. And especially once you got thrown a ball, I really liked the progression of her story.
Yeah, and that's something you can't really do with the tactical created party. I would say though, I like the idea. In fact, if I ever get around to a sequel to Realms of Antiquity, I think I would start it with this: you're a single character, and that you can either like recruit generic NPCs from like the Adventurers Guild. You can just see
hiring hall.
or have actual real NPCs who can join your party that have personalities and whatnot. I kind of like. I think I would want to embrace the single character start though, because that just fits better with the narrative.
Yeah, and for me, next time I really want to. I really do want to have a party, because one of the experiences in writing a CRPG that I have not had yet in making this game is writing intra-party dialogue, and I do love it so.
The thing about like recruiting from like random people, I was about to bring this up. Darkest Dungeon. Have any of you played that?
I've watched it played, but I have not played it.
The concept is there's a stagecoach and there's people on the stagecoach, and you can recruit them into your town, or you can just let them go on their way. There are no set characters, but every character is recruited. You are managing them, but you're not in the game. And it's a really interesting way to look at it. My wife and I together have put in 764 hours on that game.
Wow.
It's so good. But yeah, you'll get attached to a couple people, and you can rename them. You can customize them a little bit, kind of like XCOM. You name them after your boss, and then let whatever happens.
And in Darkest Dungeon, whatever happens can be a lot.
It can be a lot. It can be real. Yeah.
I named this after my girlfriend, and now they are broken.
They're broken, right? And they do kind of shout at each other, and there's some back and forth, but it's also pretty generic, and it's just fun. It lets you really kind of customize and build things out your own way, but that's a much longer thought process. So
yeah, it's also frustrating when a character that is really well written and might be narratively interesting, or might just be fun to have in the party or whatever, is like a really unoptimized build for the game or something. Like Pathfinder Kingmaker has a lot of this problem, where a lot of the NPCs are just incredibly badly statted for their class. And it like it drives me nuts. Like I started playing it and then I kind of backed off because I felt like, and I've done some research and it turns out this is not really the case, but it started to feel like if I wasn't willing to put in the time to research how to optimize multi-classing these people, I wasn't going to be able to get through the game. Turns out that's really only true on higher difficulty levels, but I was just like, I am not. There was a time when I would have happily looked at this party member and gone, okay, over the next 16 levels, what are the feats that all 20 classes can get? How do I put this together? And now I'm just like, I am going to go play another 10 minutes of Marvel Snap instead, you know?
Yeah, funny enough, I
So-
do the opposite with Realms of Antiquity. The recruitable characters are slightly better. They have higher attributes than you can actually get if you created the same class.
Mm.
So and that all balances out though, because you can get the touchstones to raise attributes, and then you can basically get your created party just as strong if you wanted to. So are you finished there, Adam? Or
Yeah, that'll do.
okay. So yeah, before we sign off, we can talk a bit about our projects and where we're at with them. I know we kind of already have. I'll start. Still been working on a roguelike, but I'm sidetracking a bit because I decided I was playing Tunnels of Doom on a lark on my old TI, which is still great fun. And I found a guide that broke down the save game files construction down to the bytes, because it basically had to use video memory for actual memory because the console itself only has 1/4 of a kilobyte of CPU RAM. So well, I'm playing it and I'm like, this is great, but there's so many little annoying things. Like if you hit the wrong key and try to fire a melee weapon, you lose your turn. That's just bad design. And it's very slow because it's written in a low-level language called GPL that was efficient but very tight. You see 3D dungeons building visibly.
Mhm.
And it's just really weird. And I thought, I could rewrite this in assembly. I could make it fast as hell, and I could make an engine that can consume the old save game files and run any of the old Doom games. So that's what I've started work on, because I try to replicate it so it looks exactly like the original. It's only a couple things I would have to kind of guess at the mechanics used for attack and defense. That's fine tuning needs that. The biggest thing is none of the maps generate corridors. They're actually procedurally generated each time you go up and down a level, because he didn't have the memory to store actual connections, just room locations. Discerning that algorithm is a challenge, because apparently he went crazy with it and did all sorts of like, I'm going to store room sets and split trees and stuff, and I'm just going like, yeah, it's really clear he was out of college because he's using way too much CS stuff.
Put too much mustard on it.
Yeah, too much mustard on it. So, but that's the project I'm kind of working on now on the side, because I think I can get it done pretty quick. And I know a lot of the old 99ers would really appreciate being able to play the game with a lot more speed and stuff like that.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I wonder what Mark's working on.
Could be anything.
The National Case 2 dance.
Right. So Noxer Chaos 2 Dragon's Mirror is my project. It is a full-blown sequel to the original Noxer Chaos game, and something that will be is not a secret, but will be apparent when playing it pretty much right away. Is I've organized the world of Noxer Chaos. The world's called Valley, and I've pretty much taken like the Elder Scrolls model for that, or use the Elder Scrolls model for that, where each game is set in a region of the larger world. The first Noxer Chaos game didn't have a subtitle because it was the first one, and I know there were going to be more. But it takes place in a region of Valley called the Isles of Windmar, which is named as such a number of times. But at some point in the future, I'll be writing out Noxer Chaos subtitle Isles of Windmar to refer to that. And in the original Noxer Chaos game, there are breadcrumbs dropped mentioning 2 other regions of the world of Valley, and there's more than, as a matter of scale, there's more than just 3 total, but it names 2 of them. One of them is Helm's Reach, and the other is Dragonsmere. And in fact, the Lord of Dragonsmere happens to be visiting the Isles of Windmar and appears as an NPC in Northeld Castle. Lord Drakensmere, I think his name was. I have to look, double check that. All these names in my head. And he was there seeking help from Lord Estentar, the Lord of Northeld Castle in the Isles of Windmar, seeking his assistance and counsel because of some kind of vague crisis that he referenced in Dragonsmere, something about the dragons have awoken. Those are the breadcrumbs laid, and so that'll be the sequel taking place in the region of Dragonsmere. And what I am aiming for in terms of like what's going to be new and exciting. This isn't like, when the Ultimas were being made, it's like each one is like getting rewritten to push the technology further and further. And I don't quite have that luxury because Nox Archaeus was essentially somewhere between Ultima 5 and Ultima 6, where they made the jump from the 8-bit machines to the IBM PC, etc. And we have pushed the Apple II almost as hard as it can go. I mean, certainly not as hard, but there's a law of diminishing returns at this point. But we are going to have some new features made possible in part because it's going to be a rather than a floppy disk supported game, it will just run on hard drive images and emulators and on original hardware. Apple IIs, not well known, but they could actually have hard drives back in the day. They were just uncommon and expensive. And there's modern day Apple II hard drives that have been engineered to replace, because aging parts and all that. So it's still very playable on original hardware, but by going to hard drive only and not supporting floppies, the disk space constraint doesn't totally go away, but it's much less, as well as it eases up on the memory a little bit, being able to swap more stuff in and out. So from a feature standpoint, I'm aiming for auto mapping and some kind of auto map feature, which is not to say that it's not, I mean, it's still going to be designed in a way where it's kind of designed from a mindset of the players making their own maps. The auto map will just be something you can turn on if you want, that sort of thing, as well as NPC portraits, like large portrait images, just to give it a little bit more artistic splash. And additionally, my goal is to rewrite the stats system. Is I think the stats system that's like the core of the gameplay loop in most any RPG. And since we can't really move forward much in terms of, like, if at all, like in terms of graphics and sound and things like that, because we're sticking with the Apple II because that's kind of the point for us. My thinking is the best way to make the game feel fresh and not just a new coat of paint, so to speak, is to do a new stat system, and a new stat system is going to lead to some new game mechanics, some new puzzle mechanics, and all that just kind of, I think orbits around the stat system ecosystem to some extent. So all in all, it's actually quite a bit to bite off, even though there's a lot of engine code being reused, in part because I'm designing a whole new tool chain for designing content. Out of the 5 years that it took to make Nox Archaeus, a full 2 of those years was just creating the content, and that was with some pretty cool tools that I threw together. And this time, I'm really going all out on it, building an application, a web-based application in TypeScript with a MySQL database that a team can collaborate on. Well, one person's making maps, another person could be writing NPC dialogue, and etc. So it'll be really well done tools in modern technology ultimately to create content on an 8-bit machine.
That's awesome.
So,
I got a couple questions.
yeah, go for it.
One, are you going to be able to import a character or party from the first Nox Archaeus into Nox Archaeus 2?
You know, that subject was brushed on earlier.
Or from Ultima 3.
Yes.
Yeah, we're talking about Brexit. I am really just not a fan of that, and I'm probably just going to be a stick in the mud about it. Even though I know there are some people that like that. To me, all I see it is it's a it's a quick start. You know, so okay, you import characters from somewhere else, and they're going to get bumped up in stats, but they're not going to come over at what they were. It's a quick start option, is what it is, and you know, I don't begrudge anybody that has fun playing that way. I just personally don't get it, and as a result, it's unlikely that I'm going to spend the time doing it versus spending the time on other things for that reason. You know, so
No, that makes sense. And so that means you'd also start over at level 1 with the new stat system too.
well, you know, and then you add the new stats. I mean, that would just be a nightmare to then try to, you know, I suppose Disparate Games did it, but it would be more difficult with a different stat system. But yeah, everybody's starting over at level 1, and how you go from being, you know, the game ended with like you're defeating this this demigod on his hellish plane. How we get from there to you're starting over at level 1? First of all, how did you get out of there? and then somehow, you know, you're level 1 starting over. Well, that will be, you know, a storytelling challenge there, and I may get a little assistance from our old friend Lord British. You know, Lord British is my Deus Machina in the game. So we shall see.
You always go with the Fantasy 2 approach, which is, oh, you've been shipwrecked and you lost all your stuff.
I did that the first game, even though you didn't have any stuff
That's
to lose
true.
in the fire game, but I did the shipwreck thing. So
Could go Gandalf the White too.
I mean, all I'm saying is that, you know, when you get transported from some hellish plane that is collapsing in and on itself, you know, a lot of stuff can happen. Just be glad that you're alive. That's all I'm saying.
Noxo Luvatar has sent you back.
And so, Chris and other Adam, you guys, of course, are still working on getting your stuff done. I don't know. I'd say, how far do you guys feel like you have to go to get to an actual release?
And I'll point at one of us first.
Yeah, I was going to say, you want to go first, Adam, or do you want me to?
I'll go, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I came into this year really wanting to be done this year. It has taken me longer than I'd hoped to get to a wider beta test. This is my first attempted playthrough from start to finish. The playthrough was interrupted because there was one last bit of feature creep, which is to say that as I was playing through, I've gone back and forth on this a couple of times. I had started implementing it, and then I decided I wasn't going to bother. Again, this is another thing that I've talked about in the past, which is to say, I finally, in my own playthrough, decided that in this day and age, the game will not be successful without some form of quest journal. And so I have implemented it, and I have been beating my head against the quests that I have already written into the game that don't play well with a quest journal. Like the one that I've got right now is you get to a point where you just need more information, and eventually you decide that you're going to need to figure out how to get to the Oracle. But the Oracle is just somebody that a handful of people mention various rumors about, and you kind of hear about it over and over. And then one of them is just like, I really wish I could find a wizard who specializes in divination to ask. And then when you meet one, you're supposed to ask. If I put that in the quest journal, there's no puzzle here.
Right.
the game just tells you what to do. But if I don't put any of it in the quest journal, like I have established that you're going to need to take some of your own notes. I'm just going to help you with some of it. And this is a place where I'm like that. But in any case, so I am at the point right now where I am writing the quest journals for acts 2 and 3. I have finished the quest journals for act 1. I have finished most of the quest journals for side quest stuff that you can hit whenever. Once I do that, I will finish my playthrough and win the game. I am currently assuming that the game is going to have unwinnable bugs. And so once I have played through and won the game, which I had hoped would have happened by now, but hopefully I will manage it by the end of the month. Then I will get the game out to beta testers. I'm trying to get some last bits of art in that will let me take the screenshots that I want to put in the player guide and on the box, because there will be physical box copies. And then I can finally finish the design of those things and get them printed and made. I can then finally fulfill the 5 years old. I did a Kickstarter for art in the manual of the game, not in the game itself. And I have fulfilled all of the backer rewards for that, except for the 11 people that backed at the very highest tier that are supposed to get boxed copies, because I haven't managed to get the box made yet, even though I have the cloth maps printed already and I have the almanac printed already.
Oh, that's
Nice.
With art from not only the talented Indy Martin, who did most of my art, so I kickstarted, but the one image that I got from Dennis Lubay because I needed one, as Mark will fully appreciate. So if all goes well, if beta testers don't, cause me to rebalance half the game again, which was one problem that I kept having I'm so bored of the first 4 hours of my game because I've had to start over so many times because I would make large enough changes that I'm like, I need to see what this does from the beginning. Like earlier when I mentioned that my spawners now constrain monsters more tightly, it's like, well, I have to start a fresh game to see how that goes.
That master fatigue will happen. I had that happen too. The worst problem. That's why I say make sure that you structure your save game file so they don't have to constantly start over because the structure of the saves changes.
Yeah, I have managed to keep my save file. I mean, my save file is just a JSON object. Because I'm on a modern hardware, so I don't have to worry quite so much. So I have some amount of flexibility. It used to change, like it hasn't changed in a couple of years. The possibility that I will someday have to save the version number in the save game and have a routine in the game that checks and updates if that happens someday is on my mind as a possibility, but I have so far managed to avoid it. But it is very much my hope to get it done by the end of the year, given how many of the milestones I've missed just so far this year. I'm not sure that that's realistic, but I'm really hoping because I really wanted to do it last year too. And when it is done, it will be on itch.io. I don't honestly expect the game to wind up being I feel like I'm going to wind up shooting for a slightly lower tier than Realms of Antiquity and Nox Archaeist hit. I am not sure that I expect to ever wind up on GOG or Steam. I will face that as I get closer and possibly poke people for advice and help, particularly about how game updating works, because like I was going to build into Electron an auto update, and then I'm like, will Steam want to clobber my auto? Worrying about that later. For now, building in the auto update is something that I'm going to start working on once I've got the game out to beta testers. I'm like, finish the game to a point, and then like some of the side quests and some of the additional polish is what I will work on while progress is being made by other people as well. Whereas getting to the game finishable, I need to do before I can start getting help from other people.
Yeah.
So that's where I am. That's my, very vague roadmap. Let's see if I can get it done. And then I'm going to binge the shit out of games that I haven't been playing because I've been spending my time on this. I haven't played Mass Effect yet. Like,
Oh man.
yeah, that's how long I've been at
You
this.
only need to play the first one.
Also correct.
And I was going to say, make sure you got Rickles and L2 on your beta team. They will smash your engine.
I'm not sure how much they will get out of it because there isn't as much there is no sit there and fight sharks to level up your crit skill or whatever the Nox Archaeist.
Playing stuff. That's what they do.
I hope that they will. I would love for them to be part of that. I hope they will find stuff, but the tactical level is a lot less interesting in my game. It's basically Ultima 5 level. You've got one person and you don't have a lot of skills and feats and such. So there's going to be less. Like Rickles is not going to play my game 40 times to find different ways to get through it because there's just not as much space. But I am absolutely sure that he will find something that I absolutely did not expect and, put through into the end game somehow. It's what he does.
Oh, yeah.
Chris, take it away.
So I am Invaders from Planet X. I am about 90% done. So that means I got about 90% to go. Because I am on the settings and high scoreboard and all that fun. Make your sliders work so you can change the screen resolution and stuff. And it's just kind of grindy and a lot can go wrong. And you go down a hole and go, oh, that doesn't work with this other thing I did 2 months ago. So, but the game is playable from start to end. It does everything it's supposed to do. I've put it in front of testers. It's just the settings and mechanics to go. So I expect like within the next month, the beta page will go up for Steam just because I know this is not going to be the best game on Steam, but it's not going to be the worst. And I wanted to put a game on Steam to just see what the process is. Like, how does this work? How do I do, like Adam was saying, how do you do the updates? Like how does that work when I go to update this in a month because something weird happened? And what does that do? And what does that break? And that way, when I put out the game I really am passionate about, my Ultima style RPG, which I'll be starting to build up stuff towards, I'm not like looking like a fool the first time I put it out and just screwing everything up. I mean, I will still make some serious mistakes, but as long as I can keep them minimized, I'll be happy.
One thing I should add, and I'm sure Mark can collaborate, this is Steam. You basically it's like $100 US to just get going. They don't actually vet things. I mean, they will after the fact. You have to submit for it, and then they're going to make sure you're not doing anything, that they don't want to support. But but yeah, Steam's not bad. Itch.io is really easy, and
Itch is really easy.
Yeah, in fact, their update process is great too. Steam provides you with a pipeline CDK and you can run a GUI and do your updates that way. It works pretty well.
I have a couple games.
Apparently, you got to wait for GOG to call you.
Apparently, but so cool that they did, man.
Yeah,
so long overdue.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, no, for me, it's like as I'm filling out the Steam pages, it's like, okay, now you have to fill in this box. And I'm like, oh, I never thought about that legal name side thing that I'm gonna have to do here. What name do I want to appear there? What do I, it's this little tedious stuff that you're like, oh, I didn't have a plan for that. Why, no one cares. Steam, go away.
The biggest thing is art assets. Both GOG and Steam make you supply a ton of crap. And it's changed, by the way, since the last time, Mark, because all the stuff you guys gave me was the old stuff. Now they've changed it.
Oh, lovely.
But thankfully, they also have a guy who will directly contact you and tell you what he needs and help you out. So
oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that
they are much more of a high touch operation in GOG. Steam is like, I mean, we've never talked to anyone over there ever. It's all automated for better or for
Yeah.
worse. What I do like, and I would say probably mostly for better, because I hate waiting for GOG to do stuff. I mean, when we launched Lord of Storms, that was actually like a coordinated. We wanted that to launch at the same time as everything else. The first time was much more fumbling around. We wanted to actually do a coordinated launch, and so we got him to commit to a day and all that. And okay, so we're doing the launch in the day, and they mess some things up because you don't build your own page. They build it for you based on what you need, and they mess some things up. And a couple of the things he was like able to change while we were working together on it. It took a while, but he did. And then there were some other ones that he's like, well, he can't do that. Someone else needs to do that. And it was like some random holiday, you know, in Poland, and you know that half the office was out or whatever. And long story short, there was stuff that they never got straightened out. That became irrelevant over time. But for like the time window where it was relevant, you know, it was messed up, and that is a frustration that I have with GOG, with it being. But on the other hand, because with it being a higher touch environment like that, they'll reach out to you about sales. With Steam, it's up to you to track when their promoted sales are.
Mm-hmm.
If they have themed sales, it's up to you to get your game approved for them, that they meet the fit. It's just a whole bunch of rigmarole that you got to manage with Steam. Whereas GOG, I mean, they'll just literally email me, and probably about once every month or two at the most, I'll get an email from them saying, hey, do you want to participate in, you know, the RPG themed sale or the rich story sale, or they have these different themed sales.
Yeah.
And all I have to do is say yes, and they take care of everything. And they promote the sales. So by saying yes, it's not just okay, they set up your game with some discounts. Great, you know, you can do that through the Steam control panel. These are promoted sales where whatever games are meeting this theme, you know, they're going to push that out into email blasts and feature on the page. And I'm sure Nox Arceus doesn't rank up, you know, list or anything. But it's on a list somewhere that's getting promoted, and that's enough that I see a nice bump in sales every time they do one of these things. So that I will say positive in the favor of God.
yeah, no, I definitely am very pleased with the launch. Did 50% off for a week and sold over 270 units. So
Excellent.
I mean, I would say with CRPGs, the problem with a long CRPG, not a short one, is it takes time for your fan base to get big, and word of mouth to spread, and then get other people involved. So
that is another reason I'm like focusing on sort of a budget title approach as I get started. Like, I'm not going to shoot for Ultima 3 the first time. I'm going to shoot for an Akalabeth or a low end Ultima 1, and just put something out that I know it's going to be 5-10 hours. People are going to be done maybe under $5, just something to, but it puts a little lore out there. It starts building that audience, and I'm going to try to attack it that way and see how things go.
Yeah.
Sounds like a much smarter way than what I wound up.
Well, I came to the conclusion by watching all of you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that I'm at least an object lesson.
Yes.
Because this was originally the smaller of the two projects I had in mind, and I decided to do this one first to prove to myself that I could finish a project I started, and now here I am over 10 years later.
I'm trying to remember the first time I heard about your project. I mean, when Mark mentioned it again to me one time, and I looked it up, I'm like, I've heard about this before. I was super excited about it. Because anything Ultima, I'm like, I want that feeling again. I want to somehow go home again, and there's not a lot of ways to do it anymore.
Yeah, I seem to recall there was a Ultima 1 remake that ended up they had to rename it because eventually Electronic Arts noticed and went, "Hey, you can't do that."
No, they decided that they wanted permission before they tried to release an Ultima 1 remake, and EA would have looked the other way if they had just done it, but would not give them permission. And so once they
Mhm.
had contacted EA proactively and EA did not give them the permission, then they did a rename and then it all fell apart.
I don't want to get somebody in trouble, but there was a developer who I was talking to, and I'm like, I don't know who owns this. I'd like to do a remake of it. How would I go about finding out? And he went, you don't. Make it and see if anyone yells at you. I'm like, okay. Off I go.
Yeah. There's a board game I kind of want to remake where literally no one knows who has the rights to it right now.
Yeah.
Like I have heard from the original author, but like because of
owns it?
buyouts and such, and I'm just like,
Any
Anyway.
game from SSI, good luck.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that was that was astounding when they were able to dig up all the. They were actually able to get it so that they could put them up for
Yeah.
play. That was, good work
Huge.
done.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a huge not to be untangled.
Definitely. All right, well, I think we are done, gentlemen. So,
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you much.
so
Good.
See y'all later.
Thanks for
Thank
joining.
you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Right. Right.
this is probably where we'll stop the recording.
Yeah.
Looking for the button. I would swear that they moved it, except they didn't. I just never remember where it is.